The Bill Simmons podcast is presented by FanDuel Sportsbook. We did this big docuseries for Max and HBO that premieres on March 3rd, Monday. It is about the Boston Celtics. It is about 8 decades, how they intersect with the NBA and the city of Boston and America and all the great players and rivalries and feuds, and we're all really proud of it. So Monday, March 3rd, it's coming. In the meantime, I have a little pyramid for you. Celtics Pyramid. I narrowed it to 15 players, and we're going to do it right now. Here it is. 15 players. And the catch is, it has to be the Celtics version of them. So this isn't like Kevin Garnett. I'm not taking Kevin Garnett's whole career. It's just Kevin Garnett on the Celtics. Anyway, pyramid. Top level, one guy, Bill Russell. I have him as the number 3 all-time guy. 11 of 13 titles. The most important on and off court NBA star ever. Relevant. Greatest winner in the history of sports, also relevant. He's at the top. Next two, Larry Bird, John Havlicek. I don't need to make the case for Larry Bird. I have him as the 6th best guy ever. 3 straight MVPs, 3 titles. But here's a fun Larry Bird fact. MVP from 1980 to 1988. 4th, 2nd, first, 3rd, 2nd. That's over 9 years. Larry Bird was amazing. And I think he even would have been better now. John Havlicek, in the running for most underrated NBA superstar of all time. 8 titles, 25,000 points, played 16 years, which is like playing 25 years now. I don't know how he did it. His 3-year peak, 27, 9, and 8. His 4-year playoff peak, 27, 9, and 6. Was one of the most clutch players of his era, if not the number 2 clutch guy behind Jerry West. And the greatest thing about him, all-time Swiss Army knife guy. Had this whole career as a 6-man. He could play guard, he could play forward, whatever your team needed, he could do it. And then eventually he ended up as a forward during the last couple titles. But there's never been a career quite like that, where you're just winning when you come in, you're winning when you leave. And then the next level, so Bob Cousy, if I had to do a Mount Rushmore, he would be the 4th guy for that. 6 rings, won an MVP, best non-center of the first 15 years of the league. The first fun, entertaining player in the history of the league. That's relevant. First great point guard ever, relevant. 10 first All-NBAs, 2 second All-NBAs. He was just a dominant player. By the time he retired, he was basically the Babe Ruth of the league when he retired. And then he passed the torch to his teammate Russell and Elgin and Wilt and everybody else. But that's the top 4. So the other 2 on that level that I would put, Dave Cowens, who was one of the most important players of the 70s, won an MVP, won a couple titles, and the 70s Celtics or the 70s Knicks, those were the best 2 teams of that decade. And he was the most important player, him or Havlicek at least, for this entire Celtics run. So he's on there. And then Sam Jones, who's another underrated all-time guy, who didn't even really get to start because the league was so stacked. They had like 8 teams, 9 teams. He was coming off the bench behind Bill Sharman, who was also awesome. Didn't get to start till like the last 2/3 of his career, but is one of the great clutch players in the history of the league, even now, and made all kinds of crazy shots. We covered some of them in the documentary. So Russell, then Bird and Havlicek, then Cousy, Cowens, and Sam Jones. Then these next 4, pretty easy. Kevin McHale, who is one of the 40 best players of all time. And I think if he doesn't hurt his foot, maybe even can climb up into a potential, I don't know, in the 20s. I don't think it's out of the realm that he could have been in a KG Barkley area, but was never able to recover from all the playoff games they played. But best low post player I've ever seen, him and Akeem. Paul Pierce, the title changes everything for him, right? If the KG trade doesn't happen, who knows what happens with the second part of Paul Pierce's career. Instead, he belatedly develops into this awesome playoff guy, crunch time guy down the stretch. He just has this whole second career. Also really durable and an excellent scorer, and went head to head against LeBron a lot. And his teams won against LeBron at not a super young point in LeBron's career either. So he's in there. Jason Tatum, who I think, so right now I have him 4th level and I have him 9th overall. Definitely has a chance to leapfrog a couple of these guys pretty soon. I think, especially if they won back-to-back titles this year, I think he has to go into the top 6 at that point. Bill Sharman, who was the best 2 guard in the league for the first 15 years of the league, warrants mentioning. Just first team All NBA year after year. Good score. And also weirdly, I think people seem to think he was the toughest guy from that era. He just cold cocked people for the hell. I didn't like the way you set that pick of me. I'm just punching you. So I'm putting him in there. And then the final level, the last five, Kevin Garnett, who was only with the Celtics for 6 years, but that 08 team, and then the first half of 2009, they make the 2010 finals. They almost make it again in 12. And a beloved Celtic too. I think the most popular Celtics since my dad has had season tickets now since the 73-74 season. Bird was the most popular. And I really think the next two were probably Cowens and Garnett in some order. And I don't know who was ahead of who, but in terms of just beloved by the crowd and the fans, Garnett has to be up there. Tommy Heinsohn only played for like 8 or 9 years because this was the smoke and drinking era. I think they were just having cigarettes at their timeouts, but was an awesome, awesome forward and big scorer, rebounder, came through a couple times in the playoffs, outplayed some forwards that were really good like Bob Pettit. So he's in there. Robert Parrish, 13 years, I think, with the Celtics, maybe 14. 3 titles, wasn't on that Kareem level as a center, but was on that second level. I think he even had a second team on NBA, so he's on there. JoJo White, another guy really underrated from the 70s. I had him in the Pyramid when I did my book in 2009 and had his most famous moment other than winning 2 titles was the triple overtime game, which is one of the great performances by a non-superstar that we've ever had in the finals. I think he played 60 of the 63 minutes. I went to that game. I barely remember it, but there was the famous image of him just sitting on the court at the end because he was so wiped out. But he was just a top 10 NBA player for 6-7 years. And then Jaylen Brown's my last guy. I think he belongs. You win a title. He wins finals MVP. The durability with him, the fact that in the 2020s, this team is just relevant year after year because of the Tatum Brown connection. I think he has to be in there. So toughest cuts for me, Paul Silas, Dennis Johnson, Cedric Maxwell, Ray Allen, Don Nelson, Casey Jones, Red Auerbach as the coach. That's all I got for you. That's my Celtics pyramid. Coming up, going to talk basketball with Kyle Mann, and we are going to talk Lorne Michaels with his biographer. It's all next. We're also brought to you by the Ringer Podcast Network. I put up a new Rewatchables on Monday night. We did Crash. We are going to do another Oscar winner this coming Monday night. So you can watch that as a video podcast on Spotify. Check out our Ringer Movies YouTube channel as well. That's also where Sean Fennessy will be going live with his Big Picture crew right after the Oscars on Sunday night on his Big Picture podcast, which is also available as a video on Spotify, by the way. We're also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. 30 on 30 lives on, our profit boost token, which we're doing every Friday the rest of the way, I think, except for March Madness. You can bet on any 30-plus point score you want on Fridays. I tweet out my picks. I love this because I love just looking at the matchups, how many teams, if you played 4 games in 5 nights, any of that stuff, and just try to guess who's going to go off. So be sure to claim the PBT. Place your 30 on 30 bet for Friday. Just look for 30 on 30 in the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Don't forget about theringer.com. Don't forget about Celtic City premiering Monday night, March 3rd on HBO and Max. And we're going to have it every week for the next 9. So buckle up because it's a really good one. Coming up on this podcast, I'm going to talk to Kyle Mann, our old friend from the Ringer, about Cooper Flagg. It's time. It's late February. We got to do it. And we're going to talk about a bunch of NBA trends and some other stuff as well. And then Susan Morrison, who wrote the definitive Lorne Michaels biography that came out last week. I loved it. I just made her come on. We spent an hour and just talked about Lorne. I had a great time. So that's the podcast. First, our friends from Pearl Jam. J. Kyle Mann is here from The Ringer. Hasn't been on in a while. Missed talking hoops with him. I was waiting to pull the Cooper Flagg ripcord with him. And then this week, Jim Boeheim compared him to Larry Bird. And I was like, all right, let's officially have the combo.
That was what tipped the scales. You couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, I was going to wait till we got to March Madness, but now I couldn't even make it out of February. He's gotten better every week. The highlights have been fun. The game situations have been fun. It's crazy that he's only 18 years old and is the all-around guy that he's already seems like he's becoming at Duke. I think people are raising their ceilings of him. I hate the word generational. It feels like it's getting thrown around too much. I think a better word is just unique. There's just not prospects like this anymore who are as good on both ends and as additive all over the place. And I'm trying to debate how excited to get about this because, as you know, these are my type of players. I'm just trying to make everyone better. I'm just super competitive. How can I fit in? Like, these are my favorite guys. So how excited do I get, Kyle, man?
Well, first I was going to add, you're talking about Jim Boeheim. Whenever I watch broadcasts that he's on, he always kind of sounds to me like an uncle who just ate Thanksgiving dinner and he's just kind of leaned back
he's
and
groggy,
making groggy comments about the game. And he just makes me laugh throughout the games. I'm glad he's on there though. He's good. You're talking about your preferences and players and things. I mean, what you're describing is winning. I mean, who doesn't like to win? I know you like to win, Bill.
I do.
I do too, So, and I think you talk about the difference between generational and unique. I think what sets Cooper apart is, we have seen, I'll say the buzzword toolsy guys. We've seen guys who check a lot of boxes and are two-way players, but I think Cooper, who does check those boxes, and we could talk about him more in detail, something that is unique about him is that I think that he has those things that you don't normally see in an 18-year-old. He's carrying one of the heaviest loads in college basketball. I had it pulled up here. His usage this year is 30.5%.
Whoa.
And his assist to usage is 0.83, but he's also averaging almost 20 points per game. So you're just kind of like, how is that? So that just tells you that, like, he's watering a lot of plants and he's watering his own plants. He's doing everything for them and still being really efficient at it. But the thing that sets him apart, I think, with that wide foundation is that, and I wrote about this on The Ringer not long ago in a profile I did on him. I'm getting Coopered out because I've talked about him so much pre and mid college, but he has the potential to evolve, I think, into like a heavy load carrying superstar at the next level. I think some things need to happen for that to pan out for him, but I think that's what makes him unique is that, and you're right. I think he could go on to any team and he could be like a Scottie Pippen type to a superstar, which I think is the most likely scenario for him. But I totally wouldn't rule out him becoming somebody who you just depend on as your hub for everything. Cause he could evolve in so many different ways.
Yeah. If you're creating a stretch four / forward guy for however we play basketball now, it would probably look something like this. Right? Maybe you'd make him an inch taller. What is he, 6'7.5" without sneakers?
I think maybe he's 6'8". Yeah.
Maybe he grew. Yeah. So maybe you'd add an inch there, but he's got the long arms. But this is everything you want for somebody next to some sort of big man who could have his hands around the rim and do all that stuff. When you try to compare him to people, Bird is the obvious one that everyone keeps like Boeheim did just because it's a white guy who does a lot of stuff. There's more Tatum with me than I think maybe there's a Duke parallel with them too. But the way the Celtics use Tatum now as a point forward who can defend all these different positions on defense, I feel like that's going to be Flagg's destiny. The difference is when Tatum came into the league, we knew he had a chance to be like a special player, but there were so many things that still needed to happen with him. He was a scorer. He felt a little Durant-ish, but there wasn't any semblance of the passing game that he has now or the defensive level that he's gone up to, or even how much better of a rebounder he is. Flagg's kind of already doing all those things, and I just don't know what he looks like when he's 25 because I assume he's just going to keep working at his three-point shot, and eventually he'll just be like a 40 to 45% three-point shooter. I assume he'll add a couple of low-post things. I assume he'll get really good at passing out of double teams. But for the most part, to be this close to a finished product at age 18, from a skill standpoint, that's what's so unusual, I think.
Yeah, it's really, it's really, really well-rounded. You mentioned, the Bird thing is funny just because Cooper, I think, as you know, grew up with a heavy Boston connection.
That's the thing. He got indoctrinated in the 86 Celtics highlights from his great mom. One of the great moms of the last 40 years, just showing him highlights.
Have you ever heard clips of his mom talk?
Yeah, they would be like driving in the car watching like a DVD player and she had like old Celtic games because she wanted them to play like that.
Yeah, those old portable DVD players. It's funny because he has this heavy kind of Boston connection, and I'm sure you would rather be good now than be bad and try to get Flagg. It's probably a worthy trade, but I mean he has, if you want to like compare him to Tatum, I think they have body kind of differences that are really affecting the way that they play. Like Tatum came into the league, I think, as more of a guy who leaned towards being like a shot creator. I think he has like a lower center of gravity, and he's a little bit more of a wiggly athlete. He has like really big, broad shoulders and got downhill a lot and things like that. Cooper, I think, is not quite the wiggly ball handler that Tatum was at the same age, but I think the thing that is so promising is when you watch him, and you watched him at like Montverde and you watched him when he was growing up, he's like, he played as a big guy who would kind of be in the middle of the floor and would make those decisions that you and I have talked about on this show myriad times, where he will get in the middle of the floor. He'll take a quick snapshot of where the spacing is on the floor. And he was really, really good at making those kind of short roll, connective passes or come off a pin down. What was really funny is that like Montverde used to run this very Bird-esque pin down on the block for him. And they still are doing it at Duke a little bit because he's lethal in the middle of the floor right now. So I think if you look at the way that he's able to read the floor in that sense, and then you see him kind of fledgling and blossoming as a ball handler, like I said, Tatum is ahead of him, but I think Cooper is way ahead of Tatum as a processor of the floor at the same age.
Couldn't agree more.
And if you look at the gap between those two things and you see where Tatum is and you see Cooper's brain, his skill set, and you say, okay, well, what's the difference there? And this is the argument I made in the piece. The distance there is just his handle. I really do believe that's all it is. And if you look at the way, you're talking about his mom, you're talking about his basketball family, if you look at the way he has courted challenges in his career since the time we followed him, every indication is that this guy is a maniac worker. He went to Duke a year early. He left Maine a year early after like 2 years there where he was just dominating. Actually, it might have just been a year. And he's just way ahead of schedule by design. And he's just an insane worker. So I expect him to bridge that gap and improve his handle.
That's the number one thing with him. And that's the thing you read from literally everybody who passes through his life in some capacity is maniac competitor. They say that over and over again. And the older I get, the more I feel like, whether it's football, basketball, name a sport, that's the number one. If you really want to be truly great, that's the number one quality that everybody seems to have. Just maniac competitor wants it so bad. Oh, he's not that great at this yet. He's just going to keep going and going until he can go up a level. And I'm with you. Like, if you were going to use him as a point forward, I don't think his ball handling is good enough to do that in the NBA right now, but he's 18. But it's one of those things that I could just see him. He's like, all right, I got to work on this. I'm going to absolutely be a psycho and work on this constantly. All right, I got to work on catch and shoot threes. I'm going to just shoot 10,000 of these until I get it. I just think that's who he is. And all the best guys ever, and not that he has a chance to be that good, but all the best guys ever had that. So if you're adding that, whoever gets him, and I'm already worried about the lottery because there's a couple teams where I'm like, oh man, I just don't want him to go there. You know, like
which ones?
Well, I don't want him to go to like a bad team where we this NBA infection that we've had for 50, 60 years, where we take these great talented players and just stick them in bad situations. Like what happened with LeBron in Cleveland the first couple of years, where he's on the worst possible team. And he turned out great for him, but you just lose a couple of years. The best case scenario is what happened with Bird. There's no scenario like that this year in the NBA that could happen, but Bird goes to the 79-80 Celtics. And they already have like good players. They go from 29 wins to 60 plus, but they had really good players in that team, and he just elevated all of them. So, I don't think Portland can get in there, but I think Portland is a team that, if he was on a team like that, that would be really interesting. Philly.
Yeah.
If
Philly
somehow Embiid came back, if they were able to stay in the top 6, San Antonio would be the dream of all the teams. Putting him next to Wemby. I can't think of a better like sidekick for Wemby, assuming Wemby's going to be all right next year.
Yeah.
They have a couple bites at the apple, but when you start talking about like just throwing them on Washington, I don't know how many of the guys on the Wizards are even going to be in that team in 3 years. You really want to build around him in the right way.
That'd be a crazy collection of like athletes, I would say, over the short amount of time. Like if they picked up Koulibaly and then picked up Sarr and then picked up, which the jury's out on Sarr. But I think adding Flagg to that. The only thing I would say that I think is a little bit of a twist. You mentioned LeBron, and I think LeBron is in this category. Is that some players when they come into the league, I look at them and I think there's a lot there, but the conditions and the context of where he goes is really, really going to affect how he develops. Cooper, I think, is a context. Some guys are like, they're just culture setters, Tim Duncan, I'm not, this is like Hallow get struck by lightning type thing I'm going to say here, but Steph, LeBron, those are the types of guys who just have winning habits. They demand the most of everybody. I had a funny conversation with a friend of mine, and he'll know that I'm talking about him when I say this. But he was telling he's a physician, and he does surgery, and he was telling me whenever in his operating room, he said he sets the tone to the point, the level of excellence to the point where the stupid people and the lazy people don't want to be in the room with him because they know they're going to be accountable. And I just started laughing, and I was just like, that's what great people do, is like, you kind of, if you're going to be in the room with them, you have to kind of elevate your game. And I think that Cooper is that type of guy. But I think you're right, man. And I think he's willing to sort of fit into any kind of scenario wherever he goes. And the shooting is going to come along like that's the only other thing I would add too, is if you go back, and people should go watch this. We've known Cooper for probably 4 years in the mainstream. You can go watch his games from when he was a freshman and a sophomore in high school. He was shooting like set shot in the driveway 3-pointers. The distance that he has come in the 3 or 4 years since we've known him is remarkable. Like, he was just a run around deer block shots guy when he first came on the scene, and he's become a full-fledged handler in college in a tough conference. Well, the ACC sucks, but tough competition.
It's interesting because one of the guys that he reminds me of, he has nothing in common with physically, really, but it's KG. Because KG was 7'1". Their bodies are completely different. I think KG was probably a better athlete, but the way as a help defender and a rim protector, and just how he's moving a second before the play is moving, and he always seems to know where shit's going. That's the KG quality. I mean, that was one of the things that made him so special. He doesn't have the same size. He doesn't have the same arm length. And he's not as like a scary competitor, but he's fierce like KG was, And I think that's another guy who is a good comparison for him, where you talk to, like, we were doing the Celtics doc, and we had so many stories from these people that played on those 08, 09 teams where they were just like, the guy was a lunatic. Like, we'd have these random scrimmages and, beginning of October, 4 weeks before the season started, and he's caked in sweat and screaming at everybody. And there's just certain guys like that. That's why the fit's going to be so important. Like New Orleans, that one would worry me because of, they've been a tortured franchise for 50 years. It just seems like people go there and bad things happen. Utah's a weird fit just because of the players they already have. Toronto is kind of the other one I was looking at, where they have, some interesting offensive players and a couple. Barnes. I don't know what Barnes is still, but they have some talent. And could that be a place where he could go in and he just becomes a centrifugal force? Yeah. How much is what happens over these next month here at the AC tournament and March Madness? Does it affect anything with him and how people are going to feel about him?
I don't think so. I think I really don't even know what would have to. He'd have to like just totally crap the bed or something. There are certain prospects that get to the point where it is you're just like, you're not having like positive generating, like diminishing returns is the word I'm trying to think of. It's watching him at this point is just not, there's not a lot of point to it because I've seen enough.
Right. Because you've sent in your verdict already. Is he the most sure thing guy you've studied since you started doing this with us?
I think that he is probably the most, you mentioned KG's active mind. I wasn't scouting back then. I was a kid, but I mean, he probably has the most driven personality, other than I would say Wemby is the only other person that I can think of that when I watch them, I'm just like, there is singular focus in this person. And you can tell that they're bright. I just think, and this can transition into kind of some of the broader things about the league and the way it's going, I think, but he just has this curiosity about him that I would not bet against. And I don't want to overstate when we talk about his handle and things like that. It's not like he's a yakety sax disaster. It's just he has a couple different areas where teams are trying to bait him into going, and he's getting smarter and smarter about not taking the bait. And there's some ways I pointed them out in the article that he can specifically, I think, set his man up to create kind of driving lanes for himself and create more advantageous situations. But you mentioned like which team he goes to. I wouldn't worry about that. So
you say it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Because you can go so many different directions with him,
Right. You could be, and the team you have 5 years from now, maybe nobody's on that team from right now anyway. Yeah, because Wemby was a sure thing, except how tall he was and the history of guys over a certain height. So even though he was a sure thing and he checked every box, he wasn't a sure thing because it's just hard when you get that big. And we have the history of it's too complicated. So it's always in the back of your head. Every time he would land on a foot, anything, you're always nervous. Luka, to me, at least for me, was the surest thing. Just kept watching what he did that year overseas and how sophisticated his offensive game was. And I thought Anthony Davis was a sure thing.
Yeah.
I was incredibly excited for Zion. I thought, holy shit, upset. But there was always that fear factor with Zion because he was so in the air all the time. Those guys always make you a little nervous. Anthony Davis was like, this guy's definitely going to be on a really good team at some point in his career. You just see it at Kentucky. Now, it took longer than we thought, but those are the guys, at least recently, that I think jump out. Am I missing on anyone?
You're right about Luka. I'm trying to think of, I'm sure there are other ones. I mean, these are just kind of the high points.
Well, because you look at somebody like Ja Morant, you're like, all right, this is a guy who can't shoot from the outside. He's an electric athlete, but, he's in the air. He's banging bodies all the time. There's things that make you nervous. If I'm taking a guy like this, I want it to be like, I know I'm going to have this guy for 12 to 15 years at the highest possible level. And for that not to happen would have to be like a legitimate fluke. It's not a legitimate fluke if like Wembanyama hurts his knee or his foot or anything, because we see that with centers. But, I think Anthony Davis, to me, it seemed like, man, I really hard to come up with a scenario where he's not awesome.
Yeah, the Luka one you pointed out is a good one too, and I think that one should be in the group too and he has some similarities in terms of the way I always try to watch guys who like run away from stagnation in their sort of development towards the NBA, because Luka every single time, and his the people around him played it really smartly, is that when he was at a certain age, the challenge, they were always ahead of the stagnation. They were like, all right, we see that he's going to stagnate here, and they just kept moving him up. And I think what happens in that situation is you just develop, the later you delay problem solving in your development, I think the worse off you are, because problem solving and decision making are the most important thing to help you adapt to the speed of the NBA. And I just think you see some guys like Chris Paul came into the league and his size always was a stimulant, I think, for him as a problem solver. Whereas you look at somebody like these high school, college guards who are big bullies on the playground who get to the NBA and suddenly they can't bully anymore. You just see them be like, for the first time in their career, like, oh shit, I got to think about this in some way.
Right.
And you see them kind of get bowled back by it. And I just think that Cooper is so ahead of it on that front.
Chris Paul was a short thing to me as a point guard. there was no way he wasn't going to be really good. And Durant was another one from that era that if you actually watched that whole season and watched just how easy it was to get whatever shot he wanted and how unusual of a player he was. It was like, there was no way this guy is going to be awesome. Where I usually get in trouble are the guys who have the athleticism, but it's hard to tell what the motor is or what the competitiveness is, or situations like Dwight Howard. It's like, the guy's 18. He's got a Adonis body. I have no idea. Would you bet your life? LeBron was an easy one.
Yeah.
In 2003. All you had to do was watch him in high school twice and like, there's nothing like this right now. 6'8.5", like athlete like this is going to be insane.
And it's hard to like not hold it against guys too, because you'll watch players who are 18 years old, like you said, and you're like, how competitive is he? I don't know. You start to feel a little wishy-washy about it. And I think to myself, I'm just thinking, well, thank goodness no one was judging my career when I was 18 years old, because I was just a total shithead and had no clue what I was doing.
You can grow out of it. But but there are red flags, though, like Ben Simmons, that LSU season, and then him just ditching the team with like a few weeks left, and it was like, that didn't go great, Like whereas like if it was somebody like Cooper Flagg or if KG had gone to college, like there's just no way they're not finishing the season and being a complete psychopath the entire season. So there's stuff you can learn. To me, Flagg is as sure of a thing as I can remember. And the best thing about him from an NBA standpoint, you can just see what he's going to be. Like there's such a clear position that now exists in the way the league is, that I would just assume somebody's going to end up using him a lot like the Celtics use Tatum. He's going to have the ball a lot. He's going to bounce around depending on what the matchup is. He can be a little bit of a Swiss Army knife the same way Tatum is. And can he be a crunch time guy? Maybe. Is he going to be better off as a completely overqualified number 2? I think he's better than that. But yeah, if that's your worst case scenario for him, it's going to be really great. All right, we're taking a break. We got to talk about a lot of NBA stuff here. This episode is brought to you by Audi, the all-new fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron, a huge leap forward featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and the most advanced tech of any Audi ever. Experience technology that puts you center stage with a panoramic digital stage, plus an optional screen for front seat passengers. That sounds fun. Perfect for watching the latest sports documentary. Maybe I made it. The Q6 e-tron is not just a new EV. It's a new way to experience driving. Learn more at AudiUSA.com. Always pay careful attention to the road. Do not drive while distracted. Sometimes in basketball, 30 points can be worth more than 30 points. You can get a 30% profit boost from The Ringer with FanDuel's 30 on 30 during Friday's NBA slate. We are teaming up with America's #1 sportsbook to give you a 30% profit boost. You can either pick a player to score more than 30 points or bet on our new exclusive 30 on 30 special markets like any game. Knock yourself out. Go nuts. I tweet out my picks on Friday. I really like these. I like trying to guess. I do the matchups. I look at how many guys have people played 4 games in 5 nights, all that stuff. Try to figure out who's just going to go off, and then you just get to root for it. Whether you want to ride with my picks or make your own, look for 30 on 30 in the FanDuel Sportsbook app or head to FanDuel.com/BS for your chance to score a bigger payout this Friday. Remember, you can find out how much 30 can be worth with FanDuel's 30 on 30. You must be 21 plus and present in select states or 18 plus and present in DC. Opt-in required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable profit boost tokens. Restrictions apply, including any token expiration and max wager amount. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Visit rg-help.com. So I asked you any NBA trend stuff that you've noticed this year. You're a big style of play, comparing stuff to history guy, as am I. Anything you've noticed this year that jumped out? You're like, well, this is something.
Yeah, this all ties together to what we were talking about with Cooper, and I think it factors into player types and things like that. When you're looking at the way the 2 teams that I think before the season, your pick for the finals was OKC Boston, right?
Oh yeah.
And if you look at the way, and I think this will tie to Jimmy's fit with Golden State too, which I know you want to talk about, this spatial sense and flow. Like we know that in the past, really since video and analytics became really, really ubiquitous and easy to access, I think that the league made a leap forward. I don't even think that's speculation. I think the flow of information just iterated really, really fast. Things were the scouting reports got more and more complicated from game to game and more detailed and things like that. So you've just kind of seen the flow of information take a leap up. And I think if you look at the way, I know you're keenly aware of this, but when you just kind of, I noticed this in the finals, whenever the Celtics players, I remember I was like watching, there are a lot of people on Twitter we have people who are the former NBA people, the people who I think are actually qualified to analyze mid-series adjustments in detail. There's not a ton of them, but we have some on Twitter. And you were watching the details and you would go down through there and they'd say, okay, there's this, and this rule for this defensive coverage. And I'm just looking at it and your head starts spinning and you just think, how in the world could someone on the court keep all that information in their head to the point where it's like reactionary? And I think that is something that is setting OKC and Boston, aside from just being smart transactionally, something that is setting those 2 programs apart is I think that they are curating people just better than anybody else. I think you're getting good basketball players, but if you look at the types of guys and you're like, why is Peyton Pritchard popping? Why is Sam Hauser popping? Why is Luke? Why are these guys working? What is it about Al Horford that's allowing him to, why is it that Derek White has found a home there? I just think that overall, if you look at organizations and how they are like evaluating people, I think that is a huge advantage in the NBA today, just because of what we were talking about in terms of the speed of the game.
Yeah, the discipline of we know what types of players we want to put together and we're never deviating from this, right? The Celtics had this last year with Brissett. They really like Brissett, incredibly popular teammate, good athlete. Whether he's an NBA rotation guy, I don't know. But they end of the year and they're like, we're not playing anybody who can't make a wide open three if the ball goes to them, right? So then they're testing out different guys this year, and it's Jordan Walsh gets a cup of coffee, and they started playing my guy Jaden Springer, and they just came to the decision like everybody in the floor needs to be able to shoot a three. That's what we're riding with. So then they end up with Torrey Craig. And then smart guys who all of them can guard somebody or at least not get completely embarrassed in space. None of them need to be like ball stoppers because they already have two semi-ball stoppers with Tatum and Brown.
You could sustain like one or two of those guys, right?
You can have 1, 2, and even those guys are trying to get better at it. And that's it. And then OKC, it's pretty clear what they're trying to. They're just getting fantastic athletes. They want the ability to go bigger or smaller depending on who they're playing, and they want guys who can fit with Shea, because as great as Shea is, he's another one who is, I don't think he's the easiest guy to play with sometimes. He has the ball a lot, especially when he's feeling it. And you got to have guys who aren't going to be like, all right, now it's my turn to shoot. They don't have any, it's my turn now. They don't have any of those guys, right?
Yeah.
And Shea's team, they all know it. And Chet is he's another one who's just so additive. Like going back to the Cooper discussion from
I think
before,
Chet and Cooper have a lot in common, actually.
He's just he's just there to help and chip in, and he takes nothing off the table. And then Jalen Williams is now their wild card. And that's the guy, I think when they get to the playoffs, he's going to decide series for them, because you're not going to take out Shea, but you can limit him a little bit. You can make it hard for him. You can send doubles at him. You can do all the stuff that teams were trying to do to Tatum over the last couple of years. And eventually you're going to need the Jaylen Brown guy to step up and make some plays. And you're going to need the side guys. That's when especially, I don't know if you saw them fall apart against Minnesota in that second game and down the stretch in OT. But I still feel like, until you've done there and you have the scars and you've lost a couple of those and you have these guys who've they've kind of been through a few of those, like I still am never going to 100% trust it. But then you'll have a situation like the 2015 Warriors where it's like, I don't trust it. And then they're hoisted the trophy, but anyway, back to your original point. I think you're right. Those two teams, and I think Cleveland, deserves credit for understanding who they are. And even that Hunter trade, I thought was such a good trade. They needed this specific thing. They went out and got it. All of their guys complement each other. And to me, those are the three. Those are the three with Denver as the wild card for the top four.
Yeah, sometimes you get lucky in a superstar like a Jokic. You just sit him in the middle of your planetary diorama, and everything falls into place around him. And Jokic takes spare parts, and if you handed a professional drummer a really crappy drum kit, he knows how to make it sound good. And I feel like that's kind of Jokic. Jokic can repurpose things that maybe one man's trash is another man's treasure. But I think with these two teams specifically, when you think about the slugging percentage of how many decisions there are within a given NBA game, and you think about the difference, the margins between a small decision, and I think like attacking and vacating space is an enormous thing that can tank whether or not a team is working. Like with the Celtics or with OKC, if a guy doesn't have an instinctual kind of feel for, all right, they're loading up on Shea in this situation, X player's head is turned, I'm going to go here. And that takes an activeness of mind, I think that. But then the other thing is just how, and vacating space is the other thing, and just getting the fuck out of the way, as we've seen, is, knowing when to do that. But I think in terms of guys getting better too, I think it's gotten super detailed down to the point of they know what it takes for a person to have like a permanence of a concept, and they know how to sort of do that whenever they're working guys out. And guys who aren't reflective people, you're talking about like knowing who you are, they're just not going to be as apt to grow as fast as other players. So I think it's gotten really like psychologically detailed even in that point. And I think you're absolutely right about it. It does kind of come down to knowing who you are. Like it's amazing how many teams across the league don't really know who they are. I made a joke last year about the Bulls. I was like, the Bulls were like Bruce Willis in The Sixth Sense. They were dead and they had no idea. And you'll look at some teams who just are just sunk cause following these paths that are never going to end up being a masterpiece. And I think that's a really key part of it.
Yeah, Golden State is a good example of knowing who you are, because the Brandon Ingram trade was sitting there for them
and they were like, nope.
whatever season. And they're like, this is the kind of guy that doesn't work out for us. He needs the ball. He's a little bit of a ball stopper. Him playing without the ball isn't awesome. Kerr had him in Team USA. Didn't work out great. He basically I don't even think he played the last 2 games. But they kind of held the fort. And then they, which ties into, we want to talk about Jimmy. Bringing in Jimmy and you're keeping your fingers crossed that he's going to behave himself. But knowing that there's a hoops IQ element with him. But then now there's this whole low post and space and Steph pulling guys away. And basically you're able to play 4-on-3 a little bit with Jimmy as your low post guy, as weird as that is. They've never really had a low post guy like that since, I don't know, Durant, if you count him but he's kind of like a medium post guy.
Mm-hmm.
David Lee going way back. I guess you could throw him
David
the ball.
West,
little Bogut,
Spates.
maybe. There's a tiny bit of Bogut, a tiny bit of David West, but Butler, it's been, and we're taping this before they play tonight, but it's been really fun to watch the different spacing they have now. And Steph's stats have immediately gotten better. I mean, he's just, it's already had an effect on him. And the more, I love the trade when it happened. We were really bullish on it. I bet on the Warriors when I was at the Super Bowl to make the playoffs on FanDuel. The more I'm staring at it, like there are some Rasheed Wallace 04 parallels.
Ooh.
Where, both of those guys, neither of them had actually won a title, but gotten really close. Both of them were just unbelievably talented. Both of them wore out their welcome at their old place. And both of them were a non-sexy asset because of what had happened, but they were still assets.
Yeah.
And then it's like, what if we can take this and move this here into this culture with these people? What does this look like? It's very hard to pull those trades off. We've seen a lot of people try to pull off the 2004 Rasheed trade. They might have done it. This is a team that had no championship ceiling at all. And now they're a team that we have to at least mention.
Yeah, there's a sweet spot of distressed asset and talent that you could bet on in the right scenario, and you also just have to have the culture to sustain something like that. And the Warriors have proven over and over again that they can. But I think the big thing, I was looking at some of the stats through, I guess it was 7 games. I mean, there are 7 3-man lineups that Jimmy is a part of that have a +20 net rating, and only one of them is like actually negative. He's in one lineup that's like negative 0.5 or something. So his impact on it has been immediate. And I think you hit it where, talking about like Durant in the post, I think the big thing is that Steph has not had like a switch partner for a while. Like he hasn't had a guy on the floor where if you switch this is going to create an issue, because you think about, Wiggins had his little run there where he was doing some things, and they've had they've had scores here and there, like Poole, they could put him in an action for that season, and he was making lemonade. But I think that that is like the starting point. Really, since like Iguodala or Durant, I don't think that they've had a guy that could punish a switch as consistently as Jimmy does.
Iguodala is a good one for that, because some of the defense that he brought to the table is some of the stuff Butler's doing for them too. I'm really intrigued by them. And Lakers are another one. I think he's going to fit in easier with Golden State than this Lakers situation. I've already gone on the record. To me, they're a legitimate contender, but it's a pretty dramatic trade for midseason. The history of the league is it's really hard to make a trade like that halfway through the year and then actually have it lead to you making the finals or better. There's some examples, but not somebody as talented as Luka is. And, it's just, the league is so much more fun than it was a month ago. because Golden State was not fun to watch. I hated watching the Lakers. And now you have these two that it just feels like we have enough teams. I think Memphis is really interesting because, Ja will have these games where he's like 9 for 25, but he makes the two biggest shots of the game. He's not making threes at all. He still plays the same kind of reckless offensive game that always works out for him. He hasn't really evolved from that at all. But he's still like, they're down 6, down a point, or down 1 with 6 seconds left. I just feel like he's scoring. He's one of those guys, like in a playoff series, I'm not positive I'd want to see them. And I also don't think they could win the title. So I don't know. I think the league got really interesting, and I was not interested a month ago. How about you?
Yeah, well, I was going to say a couple things. The Luka trade, I guess I haven't even got to talk to you about it at all. But I was at the Calipari return game, which I thought was going to be the biggest story that night.
Right.
And we were sitting there in the post-game presser, and somebody showed me their phone. I was like, what? Like, I didn't believe it seriously for like the rest of the night. Anyway, I said everybody's beating that one to death. But on Ja, he definitely is the separator for them in that sense. I do think that he's suffered a little bit from defensive like officiating shifting recently, like the way that and that speaks into I think that's what has made Boston and OKC really effective too, is the fact that they just have this chain, this circular chain link that really doesn't have any obvious gap in it, because even if you are bigger than them, they're so laterally mobile and strong that they can prevent players from playing as big as they are because they move so well, because, a lob threat, one of the ways to stop a lob threat is to physically get in front of them. Like, don't let them jump, and I think that's another big thing that has really made an impression on me in terms of how to view the league is, I think strength is, we had that time where the game spread way out and, offensive players ruled the day. And I think being skinny was something you could get away with. But I think the more that they've allowed defenses to sort of exist, the more I think players like the Celtics have, like your Drew Holidays, your lower sort of secondary body kind of guys, I think are having an impact again.
It's fun to think of teams even 5-10 years ago and how they would have competed in the league now, the way how deep everything is. Because I do think the league is just better, and I think the teams are deeper in a way that whole model of the mid-late 2000s, I'm not sure. Like the 2017 Warriors would still be awesome.
Yeah.
But you go to like that 2019 Raptors team that won, and I know Kawhi was awesome, but he wasn't as awesome the last 2 rounds as I think when we think back and we think like, oh my God, playoff Kawhi in 2019, it was like, all right, the last 2 rounds not quite as good. They got a really good Van Vliet one series, and they patched it together. They had some really good competitors. But I look at that team now, and it's like, would you pick that team ahead of Boston or Cleveland in a playoff series from what we have this year? I wouldn't. With Gasol and Kawhi and Siakam, I think Anunoby missed the playoffs. Van Vliet, Lowry. I think that's the third best team in the East. So you go back and you look at some of these, like that Bucks team that won in 21. I don't think that team. I don't think that team could win now. I don't. That Phoenix team that made the finals, built around Booker and CP3 and DeAndre Ayton and Bridges and Cam Johnson, like that team's not making the finals now. There's no way. The league's just better.
Wasn't the West pretty devastated that year too? I mean, not to
there's some bad luck.
It all blurs together. But I'm trying to think back.
There was the Murray injury was a big one that year.
Well, the league sort of ebbed and flowed between the Helio thing spiked to the moon, obviously, for a while there. And we've talked about this a lot, where I think that we've kind of shifted away from that model. I don't think works as well anymore. I think, and you've seen the shift with the way Cleveland is playing this year. They went from they're a really good example of a team that was probably miscalibrated a little bit in the way that they were so ball screen dominant with Donovan Mitchell. And I would look at that team over the past couple of years and just be like, if they would just play through their big. Now, Evan Mobley had to get better. I think that's a key part of the equation. But, allowing those guys to move around him, I think they're a good example of the way the league has shifted lately when you look at the way they've succeeded.
I think people think I'm doing a bit and trying to reverse jinx Cleveland when I talk about how good I think they are. I think that team's really good. I think it's going to be really hard to win a 7-game series against them, especially when they have a game 7. And the biggest thing that's changed, everyone's talked about how Mitchell, when they gave him the contract, and he's just pulled back enough that Still his team, but other guys get to shine. Garland's healthy, but Mobley's the big difference. Because I feel like his three is going in now.
Mm-hmm.
Last year it was like, please shoot that. You're not making that. There's no way. It's going to be an ugly line drive. Now he's shooting with confidence. And it's a team that has 4 of the best 50 guys in the league. Mitchell's in the top 8. Mobley's probably in the top 20 to 22 at this point. And then Hunter as a 5th guy is nuts. And I got to be honest, like everyone's already given the $6 million award to Peyton Pritchard, who's it's weird. You have to watch him because his stats are better than Ty Jerome. And part of the reason they're better is because he's had games where he played in place of White or no Jaylen Brown, and they just let him go off and he'll have like 29. So maybe that's why he should win. I think Ty Jerome's been the best bench guy in the league. Especially in these big games. He's like swinging games. Pritchard will have games against certain teams when he just looks like an undersized guard who can't do anything, and teams are attacking him. Ty Jerome looks like is this guy a $100 million player? What is he? So I just don't think that $6 million of the year is over yet because I think he's been playing great.
Has anybody ever won most improved and $6 million of the year in the same year? Because
the double dip.
Would he have how much of an argument would he have for that? Do you think? Because is it just did he improve, or is it that he got into a context where he's properly seen? Because I think he's improved. He's obviously worked at his game. I don't think that's ever happened, has it? I'm trying to think of the double dipping on the major awards. We had a Rookie of the Year MVP before, right? Didn't Wilt?
Cade's the favorite on FanDuel, and I think that's justified.
For most improved?
Yeah, the leap that he made. Now that this is like, usually most improved is either one of two things. It's either I was here and now I'm here, or it's like nobody was even fucking talking about me last year. Now I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
Cade becoming a top 10, top 12 guy in the league, which I think he is. You saw it you've seen it during this win streak. You saw it last night. Like that's probably the winner. But yeah, Peyton Pritchard he's plus 170. Oh, Beasley. I forgot about him. He's 3-1. And like Ty Jerome's 50-1 on FanDuel. I'm like, is there a better sub than him? I guess they have Amen Thompson as a 6-man candidate.
Mm-hmm.
That's a weird one. I feel like he's a starter, but what do I know? Beasley's a good choice too. My point is, I don't think Pritchard has that award locked up by any means. Beasley's been amazing for Detroit. If he'd played like this on Milwaukee last year, they might have been able to survive until Giannis came back. The defensive player of the year, Mobley's the favorite for that one too, which, some of this stuff's going to play out. And then rookie of the year, which is just grisly. Right now, Castle's the favorite, but this is among the worst rookie of the year candidacy classes.
Are we in Michael Carter-Williams territory where
we might be? Well, that was tough because he just had fake stats on a team that stunk. But yet, I still like this rookie class. Where do you stand on it? You obviously did a lot of work on it last year for us. You happy, unhappy, medium, unclear? Where are you?
I think it's spun forward in the way that we thought it would. It was a draft class, a high school. It always is driven by the high school class because if they could draft them, they would, but they want to use the college buffer to kick the tires and see what happens when they level up in the competition. And you saw some shift. I mentioned like Isaiah Collier was a guy who was ranked really high in the class. Somebody out in LA that I assume you got to see some. And sometimes you see shifts there that happen. Like Reed Sheppard obviously ascended in that year and got drafted, but overall, we knew that class lacked like a generational, foundational type of superstar. So I'm not super surprised. That I expected that to spin forward into Summer League, which it did. Summer League was just like, there's some guys here that we like. So no, overall, not terribly surprised.
Are you surprised by Sheppard though? Because you were pretty high on him. At least being like a bench guy right away, right? I'm kind of amazed he's not playing at all for Houston. I don't really know the reasons.
Yeah, you can make the argument. You'll hear people talk about, how much time do they have? Ime, obviously, it's a high bar for a rookie to play for Ime.
Yeah,
and he wants to win. That's his mentality. And you look at them and what their goals are in the short term. Reed just doesn't really fit them right now. I think the big thing is he really needs to play. I was surprised they brought him out of the G League so fast. I've heard some people kind of talk about the quality of the G League right now, which is a riveting conversation. But
quality being bad?
Yeah,
bad, right?
That it's down right now.
Yeah, it seems like it's the worst it's been.
Yeah, I've been shocked by the shooting. I mean, I didn't expect him to shoot so poorly, but I don't know. You would think that if he was doing the things that he does well, that he would get to play, because you keep hearing people make that argument about that. But Dillingham too, I thought would come on a little earlier, but I think we've seen some signs that he's going to be okay.
There were some signs the other night. I'm all in. I haven't sold any of my Dillingham stock.
Mm-hmm.
I like that he seems like a great teammate and a real competitor too, which I like.
Yeah, you know what I realized after we had finished the draft work last year, I was like, Nick Van Exel. I kept saying he just
that's a good one. Yeah,
I said he was in the Nick Van Exel spiritual lineage, and I was like, that's perfect. He's the guy. Maybe you don't lean on him heavily because you could fall down and kill yourself, but you here and there in spurts he comes in, and he's obviously really talented. Him and Ant. I don't know if he's going to solve Minnesota's problems or anything like that, but I still believe in Rob.
Who's your favorite non-Cooper Flagg college guy right now?
Oh boy, let me pull up my list here. I mean, of the guys at the top,
I'm fascinated by the other Rutgers guy, and I know he's either going to break hearts.
Ace?
I'm fascinated by Ace. I don't know what he is, and if I was a GM, I think I'd be afraid to be like, all right, this is my third pick. I'm going all in on this guy because there's a chance it just is not going to translate to the NBA in the right way. But there's another alternate universe where it's like, this guy seems legitimately unstoppable.
Yeah.
And what is this going to look like if he just figures out a couple things? His offensive, the shot making is just really unusual. I don't want to compare it to Durant because that's like, sainted ground.
Yeah.
But there's some stuff he does where I don't think he'd be fun to play with, at least not yet. It just seems like the ball's going to him. He's shooting. He's one of those guys. But there's some shot making stuff with him.
Yeah.
Wow.
With Durant, the thing that always kills me is with people when they talk about him, the dribble shooting is the thing that set him apart at his size. Yeah. And the difference is you just don't see guys that can handle and shoot it like that. But then, later down the road, we saw Michael Porter Jr. come along, who obviously had a lot of. I think he's more like MPJ personally, because MPJ at the same age was very similar in that he had this gigantic mallet that was very useful in every single situation. And for MPJ, it's continued to be useful, but every single situation was a nail for him because he had this thing that he could just rise up over people and hit shots. And Ace has that. Now, I have some. My comp that I've made is that I think that Ace is sort of like he could be a Jaden McDaniels type with the MPJ shot making.
Ooh,
I
think he could be that good defensively?
He's a weak side disruptor, and I think that the defense could come a long way. I think that he's still kind of learning the game. Like you talk about problem solving in the way we were earlier, I think he's on a new frontier. So it's going to be really interesting. I would not lean on him to be a decision maker for me, like going to the basket, things like that. There's not much proof that he's going to be somebody that can pass out of a situation where he gets loaded up against. But you're right, his shot making is crazy.
He's an extension pink slip guy. You take him and it's going to work out and you're getting a 4-year extension, or you're going to be on NBA TV in a year. it is a risk reward pick, but I am fascinated by him. And his teammate's really good too. I mean, his teammate is a way more traditional. This is the kind of guy we've seen succeed in the NBA over and over again. I don't have a lot of takes on him.
On Dylan.
Yeah.
He fits more what we were talking about before, that body, that sturdy lower body type. He's a big guard. He's a great finisher in the lane. He's really crafty.
Yeah, he's going to be a really good NBA player. I don't know if he's going to be an all NBA guy, but he'll be good.
Yeah, there's one guy that I would be fascinated for you to watch just because I want to hear your opinion on it, because he has a lot of the traits you like.
The foreign guy?
No, well, Yegor Demon earlier in the year, I texted you. I was like, you got to watch this guy run ball screens. He still is fun to watch, but he slipped a little bit because of some of his scoring issues. But the other guy that I would say is Derek Queen from Maryland. I think you should watch because he is a very, very, has crazy hand-eye coordination for his size. He's a really smart, handsy defender. He can pass the ball, but he has this kind of slow-mo. I said he has some sort of. This is a dangerous one. I hesitate to say this, but he has some kind of Diao kind of qualities to him, where he's a little. Diao. He's a little laissez-faire, and then every once in a while he's 6'10", he'll just drive baseline and rifle a left-handed pass through a tight window to somebody on the money. And he's somebody really fascinating that I'm curious to hear your take on when you get to watch him.
I got to say, I've been impressed by Duke, just the team that they have. Like they have a bunch of guys that I could just see on NBA teams down the stretch, but I admittedly have not watched. I mean, one of the wrinkles for me is I've never watched women's college basketball during the regular season before, and I've actually watched I've watched women's college over men's college a couple times, which has been really surprising to me. But so I feel like I'm not as versed on the men as I usually would be at this time of year. But I have watched a bunch of Duke, and for them to not at least make like the Final Four, Final Two, I just feel like something really bad would have to happen during a game. Like they just go ice cold. They just seem really complete. And,
they have a guy on their team that I think you would like named Sion James, who is built like Drew. He's a big and when they moved him into the starting lineup, they played Auburn, who has been sort of the favorite for the year. They played Auburn at home, and they moved him into the starting lineup, and their season just changed. He's a smart player. He can guard multiple positions. So he's somebody that I expect to be pretty instrumental to whether or not they win. LeBaron Filan is another one too that I would throw out that I really, really like a lot for Alabama. But yeah, I'll wait until you circle around and we can.
Yeah, I'm just starting. We finally have more time to watch stuff. Hey, so I want to talk Celtics a little bit because we got the big documentary Celtic City coming on March 3rd, Monday on Max and on HBO. You follow the history of the league. You try to intersect it with the guys we're watching now. Is there anybody from all of the different Celtics eras that you would love to have seen in 2025?
Oh, man, that's a great question. I mean,
Bird, you can't count Bird.
Yeah, I remember when I was making that Indiana travel video last year, I think I was texting you about I was going back and watching some of the Indiana State footage, and I was just thinking Bird absolutely would have translated to today.
Yeah.
No problem, just because of the space. You want to talk about spatial intelligence. I mean, over the decades, I think Ainge is a pretty fascinating player. When he was younger, just seeing the way that he was able to, just obviously a really smart player. Dennis Johnson, I'm a big fan of. I think in the era of ball pressure, he would have translated. I'm trying to think of this. Do you mean
how about McHale? Because I feel like McHale is now a unicorn that will never happen again, because whatever version of McHale happens at 25, that guy's just shooting threes all the time. It's up, which started to happen to McHale near the end of his career. Mm-hmm. He started stretching the floor more. I just don't know if a low post guy would ever have that arsenal of moves anymore, because it would just be banged in your brain to shoot threes and clear space, get out of the way for other people. I don't see it happening again.
He's somebody that I think would probably, this kind of reminds me of our conversation when we were like creating the all-time fun team. He's somebody that I think would have probably been the fulcrum of a like big guy driven offense with movement around him, just
like a little Şengün on Houston, tiny bit.
Yeah, because if you had the right guards around him, he was such a dominant one-on-one player. He would have been pretty. Şengün is an interesting. Where would you compare McHale and Şengün as passers, though? I think
McHale became a better passer because he played with Bird. There was that osmosis thing. I think if McHale's on another team, he's probably like 1.1 assists a game. But I think when you play with somebody who's just always making extra passes, there's no way you don't start doing it. It's one of the great things about basketball. Yeah, I guess like you would have had McHale would have been a center. You would have put shooting all the way around him and just tried to get him on the low post with space, and that would have been a good one. The types like the Parrish types, those guys now they're just valued completely differently in the league. Because back then every team needed one, or you needed a center to guard the other centers, and now those guys are like $15 to $20 million players, and then or you'll see a team like the Lakers, they're just like, I guess we're just not going to have a center. Or it's somebody like the way the Celtics use Porzingis and Horford as like these stretch fives with size that, ideally you can kind of play them off the ball and then have them come flying in on the paint. It's just, there's not a lot of Parrish types now. Detroit probably plays the closest to what an older era team plays like, right?
Yeah.
With that, they have size and rebounding, and they're tough and nasty. They have a couple shooters, and then they have one really good offensive player, and it's just kind of, it's like a 1991 type of team.
Yeah, and they've gotten, we knew this in the past few years, was for the player type that Cade was and where he was in his growth, they tweaked some things to help him out. I kept calling it the crowded elevator. It was, Cade was just like, there are just too many people on the elevator. Can you please get off? The other one I was in making this documentary, did you feel any kind of burden? I'm not trying to interview you here, but did you feel any kind of burden to represent somebody that was maybe not properly represented in the younger generation? Because I think of like a Havlicek, if you look at his stat lines, so balanced throughout. Was there anybody that you felt like a burden to be like, we really should focus on this guy to bring out, to shine a light on his like legacy?
Yeah, we had a few of those. Havlicek's definitely one. Who was an incredibly important player to the league in the 70s, especially as one of the legacies to Russell and the Celtics, but also like as the ABA is getting more and more fun, he's one of the few stars they had left. Reggie Lewis was a big one.
Yeah.
And we hadn't really seen that. We have a lot of Reggie stuff in the last third of the series. And I just think he's one of those that kind of came and went. People remember he died, but they don't remember how good he was and how important he was to the Celtics. That was another one. And then there's there's moments as you go through where you're trying to explain the impact of somebody. Kuzi is a big part of the first episode. How important he was to the league. That the league just wasn't entertaining. They didn't have shot clock for 8 years, and it was just a bunch of. You've seen some of the old videos. Like, it's brutal, and it's just a lot of big guys, and it's a lot of set shots and running hooks. And then Kuzi comes in, and he's easily the most fun player in the league. And he's the most fun player in the league probably for the first 15 years of the league until Elgin and Jerry West and Oscar kind of get going. And the way he ran fast breaks and just some of the old footage. It's like, it's impossible not to enjoy the way those teams played. It's so different. It's the same sport, but it has no correlation to what we're watching now. Everything's about 3-on-2, 3-on-1, 2-on-1, 4-on-2. Can we get a layup? Can we get a layup? Can we get a layup? And that's like the driving force. Now you're running the same plays and the guys are splitting out to the corners. Mm-hmm. And Kuz would be running and he'd be like doing like over the head tosses to somebody in the corner. It's just completely different. So yeah, there is some pressure with some of that just to explain like, hey, here's why this person was special for 4 minutes.
Yeah, the context is just so infuriating whenever you hear people talk about like the history of the league, because if you like talking about Kuzi, people just drive me nuts because they'll go back and use the lens of today and watch the way he's dribbling. The officiating of dribbling is like one of the things that single-handedly changed the way the game is played. Like it just blew the walls down. I had a clip of
You're
Doug
talking
Moe.
about the carrying.
Yeah, they used to, it was so strict. Your hand had to be directly on the top of the ball. And, I made a video of this one time. You just watched over the decades, the hand went from the top to kind of on the side to totally on the side to under. Now it's, and I think it's been a good thing. I think it promoted self-expression, which is what the league marketed itself on and exploded. But I just think Kuzi is one that is funny to watch. If you imagine a game where you had to dribble the way that he did, it was pretty creative. Granted, the league wasn't, integrated or anything like that back then.
It definitely was not. Well, you had the dribbling thing, you had the sneakers, the fact that they're playing in, just these rinky-dink Converses, and then it was really, really physical. People are just like, it was more like hockey. They called them cagers, the first 15 years of the league. So it's a different sport. The other thing with the assists, like they're scoring all these points. You only got an assist if it was like the guy is catching the ball and like laying it, or the guy is catching it and shooting immediately, or they didn't count it. So
I've heard old guys complain about that.
Oh my God. I mean, they must complain about so many different things, but like the equipment they had, the money they didn't make, all the statistical rules against them. But yeah, and then, we try to use the Celtics as a lens to look at the league and the sport and how it changed and how it intersected with America in all these different ways. And it is hilarious how the footage changes over the years. Even you watch the stuff from the 80s, like that, like we have a big part about the Boston Philly series in 1981, which is like probably my favorite series ever. But it's just a UFC fight. It's like a 10-man UFC fight. There's no spacing at all. Every time somebody goes to the basket, they're just getting clobbered. And it becomes this kind of hybrid of like rugby, basketball, and UFC by the fourth quarter. And that's like, you wouldn't really see that. We see elements of that sometimes with the big tense games, but not like that. There will never be another series like that, I don't think.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was watching some games. I think I was trying to watch something for Jerry West one time, and I was just amazed at the way he and Oscar Robertson would I was amazed at the pickup point. I think that is something that has really evolved now with the threat of the deep 3-point shot. Teams just pick up way higher than they did in the past. You'd watch.
Oh yeah, you're right.
You'd watch legitimate stars with the ball, like a Jerry West, who today, if Jerry West dribbled up the floor, he would be a threat from, I would say, 28 and in. I mean, like, you like legitimately would take those shots, and you would watch him dribble literally to the elbow before he gets contact, and he'd pull up for that jumper. And I wonder if some of that is what you're talking about, just the clogged lane so many times that shot was just available. I mean, Oscar Robertson did that a lot too, but I think the pickup point is something that has really, really changed over the decades.
Yeah, that's how the 85 Lakers won the finals. They just stacked it. And if you watch some of the footage from that, Danny Ainge and DJ, they're not just wide open from 3, they're wide open from like 18. So the Lakers are so packed, they're just not letting McHale and Bird beat them. And they're just like, take those 18-footers all day. And the Celtics kind of didn't know how to respond. And when you watch it now, you're just like, why didn't you guys move back? You would have just had wide open threes. You would have made one out of every 3. The points per possession would have been more. But, nobody really thought that way. There's a lot of good stuff. I think for the basketball junkies, I think they're going to be pleasantly surprised. We were able to pack a lot of stuff in this thing. You believe in the Pistons yet, by the way? I forgot to ask you about them.
I think they are on the path toward that young teams need to be on, which we've talked about in the past. Whenever you have a young team, you have a coach, you have sort of your startup CEO who comes in and is just trying to make everybody feel good. And then you're like, all right, we're going public. We need a real CEO. And you go get the person. And I think they did that. So I think we're in the phase of they're going to be entering the playoffs. And then it's sort of like Orlando did. You enter the playoffs. You get the data, read back on that, and you say, this is because the playoffs define everything. You always talk about fourth quarters in the playoffs, and it's like those things come back, and this is what we saw, this is what happened, this is the map towards what we need to do. So that's where they are in the process right now for me. So we're going to see what kind of the way teams play them, and then that's going to inform the moves that they make. Yeah, so they're on the path. Detroit fans, they seem to think I hate Cade. I don't really understand that, but but they're on the right track. So
yeah, it's a tough one and Marcelo never wavered on Cade, but last year
neither did I. I don't understand it.
But I think he was a different guy than he was this year.
Yeah,
and everyone's admitting really from the last couple months. Anyone who listened to any of our stuff or any of the stuff we were doing, like it was like something's really good is happening with Cade Cunningham here, and it keeps going and going and going. And the veteran shooters they put around them, I think, is a good model for how to build a team. It's interesting though. Like right now they're 6th. They have a chance to bump to 4 or 5. If I were them, I'd want to be in that 6th spot, and I'd want to play the Knicks because I think they could give the Knicks a shitload of trouble. They're a really tough physical team. They're probably, if they're not the best rebounding team in the league, they're in the top 3. I just would want to see them in a playoff series. And it's probably a year too early. It's probably like what Orlando was like last year, where it's like, oh, watch out for these guys. And then they shoot 20% in a game 7. But when you can rebound and you have veteran shooting and you have one guy that you can go to in the last 5 minutes, I'm taking you seriously. So I knew they were going to beat the Celtics last night. No Jaylen Brown, 3rd game and 4th night. It's kind of a bad matchup. Celtics are kind of stuck in the 2nd spot. That felt like a loss. But it's still a really nice win for Detroit. Like they've won 8 straight. I'm taking them seriously as at least a first round upset threat. I think you have to think of them that way now.
Yeah, they're in that position where they may not beat the Knicks, but they're in the position to like really take a bite out of them when they as they enter the next round, which is they're definitely not going to be a pushover. And I think you're right about they had the guys that were athletic, Asar and Jalen Duren. Duren is somebody that I was really high on. I couldn't believe the way he got stolen in that draft. He was somebody that very obviously fit the archetype of somebody that could switch, and he's just super athletic. So sort of a poor man's Bam type of archetype guy. And then the shooting. A lot of the times that's the simplest answer. You got a downhill guy, just add some space around him. It seems like it's not rocket science, but Pistons finally did it.
I mean, they're top 5 net last 15 games. They're plus 7.6. That's like, if you're in the top 5 for a 15 to 20 game stretch at this point of the season, I think you have to be taken seriously. Anyway, All right, Kyle, man, you'll come back at some point when we're in the March Madness throes. But it was good to see you as always.
Likewise, good to be here.
All right, Susan Morrison is here. She works for the New Yorker. She wrote a big biography on Lorne Michaels that came out last week or this week?
Last week.
And how long were you working on it? Because it felt like this was like almost a decade's worth of work here.
It was just about a decade. Yeah, just about a decade.
How did you convince him to do it? Because you got you spent an entire week behind the scenes in an episode Jonah Hill hosted last decade, but also it just seemed like you got a lot of Lorne time, which is pretty unusual.
I did. And I recognize how unusual that was. And it's worked for me. Well, basically, after the 40th anniversary 10 years ago, I started thinking about the show and the enormous impact of Lorne himself. Nobody has been more responsible for what makes, generations of Americans laugh, what we all think is funny. And, it's a huge legacy. And I knew Lorne a little bit because I worked for him briefly in 1984 on The New Show, which was his one spectacular public failure, his attempt to do SNL in primetime. And I was just a kid. I was a munchkin then, but I had a front row seat to this interesting situation. And I made a lot of friends there. Even though I switched to journalism, I kept in touch with all those people. So I would see Lorne maybe every 8 or 10 years. And we always said hi. And so I decided, I knew Lorne wouldn't say yes to having a book written about him. So what I did is I wrote a proposal, sent it around. I was surprised by the interest it generated. There was a big bidding war. I signed a deal with Random House. I had not promised them Lorne's involvement. And then I wrote a note to Lorne and I said, I'd love to come see you in your office. So I went to see him and I said, Lorne, I've just signed a deal to write a book about you and the show. I don't need anything from you because, I'm connected in your world. But if you would like to talk to me, it'll be a bigger and better and richer book, which your legacy deserves. And, the truth is he looked like he was going to faint. He was surprised, and he doesn't like to be surprised, as you know, if you've read the book. But he was, incredibly polite, as he always is. And we chatted about this and that for a while. And he said, let me give it some thought. And so a few days later, I followed up and we met for a drink at a bar in a hotel. And I thought we were going to, be negotiating. That it would maybe be like, well, this and that. But as often happens with Lorne, people say that sometimes you sit down with Lorne and he starts a conversation and you're like, wait a minute, I missed the previous conversation. Like he'll just kind of leap ahead. And that's what happened. We sat there. He was drinking his Belvedere on the rocks, and he just started telling stories about his childhood, about his parents. And I realized, oh, he's going to do this. I didn't have a notepad or a tape recorder, so I would run to the ladies' room and write stuff down so I didn't forget it. And, he asked nothing of me. There were no terms. There was no deal. He just, I think, he liked me. He respected the magazine. I think he knew there was going to be a book written about him. Better it be written by me than, some kind of entertainment business hack who was going to turn something around really fast. And so then I just started visiting him in his office, a couple Friday nights a month, and we would have these leisurely talks. And it was very civilized and really fun, and talk to everyone else in his world. And the charm, the real charm of it for me was that I didn't have to deal with any publicists. And that can really be the backbreaking part of a project like this. I think that, once word went out that Lorne was talking to me, all these people just said, sure, and everyone loves to talk about Lorne. So, after we had done that for a year or so, then I realized, okay, if I'm going to write this guy's biography, you want to avoid it being like a death march through the years, 1986 turned to 1987, turned to 1988. And I'm a magazine editor, so I wanted some of that up close in the room material like you have in a magazine profile. So I said, how about if I just come to the show one week and just stay at your elbow and watch everything, so I can convey to people the magic and the insanity of how this show comes together every week. Uh, I kind of related to it a little bit because it's not completely unlike the way we put together an issue of the New Yorker. We have a weekly deadline, a lot of crazy egomaniacs,
Yeah.
So, and he let me. And so I was able to sit there through all these very intense, usually confidential meetings and got to see all the complicated levers that he has to push and the egos that he has to solve. And it was, I sometimes said to my editor, this book could be, published by Harvard Business School. I mean, it's a funny, interesting book, but it's a real management Bible too.
So I was shocked that he let you hang by his side for an entire show like that, especially they're having pretty candid conversations about Jonah Hill was the host that week and the
Yep.
psychology of getting a host to either buy into a sketch or sometimes like him not wanting to promote mid-90s. Lorne didn't want to promote it, even though Jonah Hill had this movie he directed. And he's like, we don't do directors. We only do actors. But all the little tidbits you got from that, I just couldn't believe he allowed you in that inner circle. But do you think part of it was because he knew the book was coming out so much later than that episode that it was okay? Like if he had done it and it had just all run like a week later, I think that would have been weird. But 7 years later, it seemed okay because there's a lot of other stuff in there too. Like they're having problems with Leslie Jones that week.
Mm-hmm.
And she's hitting that point where she's probably outgrown the show and everybody's realizing it. But you had all this stuff in there that after 7 years, it seemed more benevolent than maybe in 2018.
Well, the first thing I'll say is certainly neither Lorne nor I knew that it was going to take that much longer. To write the
Interesting.
book.
Okay.
I mean, the book took this long just because it took this long. I interviewed hundreds of people. I have a demanding day job. I did it on the weekends, but still, I don't think Lorne's that strategic. I don't think he's thinking like, oh, this will be some years. I think he just felt like again, it was a great honor for me that he just trusted me. And I did say to him at the beginning of that week, I said, I know how this goes. If somebody blurts something out that's really, controversial or disgraces themselves or some confidential thing happens that you would like to be off the record, let's check in at the end of each day and you can tell me. That's the way at the magazine we would maybe deal with it if we had a journalist visiting at a meeting or something. But he never did. He never said, oh, when so-and-so blurted out, blah, blah, blah. Let's erase that. He never
interesting.
Did. He never did. And, but again, I think it's that, he respected me as a journalist and knew that I wasn't going to, I wasn't out to hang anybody or burn the place down. And I'll tell you the truth. I mean, there were a handful of things, particularly at the Saturday night, the party after the show, where people were wandering around, a little blitz, blabbing things that, and I mean, just because I'm a good journalist, but I'm also not out to nail anybody. And I think I probably protected a couple of people here and there. But the book is really true to what happened and to my experience. And as I said, I felt honored by being trusted that way.
Well, because if you go back to the 80s, and there was that great book that Hill and Weingrad wrote about the first 10 years of the show.
Yeah.
And as they're finishing that up, Woodward comes out with the book about Belushi. Yeah. And they talk about in the Saturday Night Live book that came out about the 10 years, like there was a chill with those guys because they felt like they were burned by the Belushi book. They'd given Woodward all this access, and then he just steered the book toward basically the cocaine downfall of Belushi. And it seemed like they basically made it seem like Lorne kind of scaled back right at the end. And he hasn't really done anything since. And I was wondering, like, did he feel like, all right, was it, because you even have a quote in the book about basically he's like, the less talking you do about how well you're doing, the better off you are, which I thought was interesting. But then at the same time, he's letting you do this book.
Yes, it's true that he has always had a policy that there isn't much to be gained by talking to the press. You can be quoted out of context. All these things can happen. And they did feel burned by Belushi, by Wired. A lot of people, including Jim Belushi, told me that they felt that they had been misquoted in the Woodward book and that things were taken out of context. I mean, that happens a lot in this business. I'm not in a position to fact check Woodward's book, but I was really careful. You know, I've been working at the New Yorker for 30 years. I was really careful in the research. I had a fact checker check everything. You know,
Yeah.
I think that there was a level of comfort with how I was going to be doing it. But you're right. I think that the only reason that he kind of went against his usual dictum, which is nothing to be gained by talking to the press, is that it was right after the 40th. The 40th anniversaries, remember, it was a beautiful show. It was very emotional. I think Lorne was a little softened by it. And I
Yeah.
think he felt it, that they were celebrating the 40th, and Phil Hartman was gone, and Belushi and Gilda and so many people, and Tom Davis, and I think he thought, God, it's going to be even a smaller group at the 50th. I think he was, for the first time, really thinking about his legacy,
Yeah.
and I just happened to kind of get him at the right time, and I definitely felt that he was reflective in a way that
Yeah.
isn't maybe his norm. I mean, you've interviewed him, you've talked to him. He's not naturally that interior person. So I think that it was just good timing. He also, I'll say I think he's a little bit superstitious, which I love. And when we met that first time in his office, I told you he knew me from the 80s, but I told him something he didn't know, which is that when I was 16 during the first season of the show, I took the Metro North train in from Connecticut and was in the audience for one of the Elliott Gould shows,
Wow.
which was magic. And it was one of his favorite shows from that season. And I think there is something that sparked something in his brain. It felt right to him,
Yeah, I felt the same way when he let me do the pod in his office. I think he knew, like, I love the show, and
Yeah.
it meant a lot to me, and I had a lot of history with it. What struck me when I interviewed him, first of all, his recall is amazing.
Yes.
I was really surprised by just how specifically he could remember stuff going back to the 70s and 80s, like it happened yesterday. But the thing that you mentioned earlier about how this book could be like almost like a business class for management, that was his sense of how to direct people, how to nudge people, the different points of a career you hit, knowing what the shelf life is of a relationship with somebody and whether they're going to leave or actually whether they're going to stay under the umbrella and just kind of stay there, or they're just going to go, and are they going to come back? It seems like he's probably put more thought into this than just about anybody, because a lot of people have managed successful companies. Not a lot of people have managed a successful company that also has to deal with all the things that come with fame and
Right.
and managers and agents and the temptations, and whether you stay loyal to the infrastructure of the show or you leave and you do something else. And it just felt like he had put like an extraordinary amount of thought into it. And that was one of the things I loved about your book, is like it's really in there. Like you really feel like all these different examples of like, it's time for them to go, or they're going to find out the hard way that they shouldn't have left. Like it just seems like that's like one of the legacies of Lorne, basically.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, Chris Rock was a great source, very smart guy.
Yeah.
And he said, think about it, this guy has been hundreds, if not thousands of people's boss. And if that doesn't make you an expert on human behavior, what does? I mean, he's almost like a shrink. He's seen so many people go through this weird crucible, right, of change. Think about like Bill Hader comes from Oklahoma in his early 20s. His only job had been working and as an assistant on Iron Chef, right? And so you see these people, and then they become famous overnight. Lorne says he's the world's expert on watching people get famous. And very often he's fully aware there's like an asshole phase. You become a big jerk for a while. And
what is this thing like? If it lasts more than 15 minutes, you just stay an asshole, or you had some quote like that.
Yeah, so he knows how to shepherd people through this. But in terms of like the management approach, I think it's largely intuitive. Like I remember Judd Apatow hearing once about how when he was a 25-year-old or 26-year-old young showrunner working on Ben Stiller's Fox variety show in the 80s, which was a great show that got canceled right away. He was terrified. He didn't know how to manage people. He was holed up in his office reading, Management for Dummies, like trying to learn how to do it. Lorne never did anything like that. I think it's a lot of it is intuitive. He's got great EQ, but also, and this was the fun part about researching the book, I mean, sometimes I think he's almost like a young character out of Dickens or something. Like every stop along the way, every bad job that he had, he nonetheless learned something important from it. Like you can see him going through the first 30 years of his life, gathering the little individual skills to becoming a producer and
Well, and
learning how to
especially
deal
his
with
interactions with
management.
stars. Yeah. And just like,
Yeah.
oh, I learned this from Flip Wilson. Oh, I learned this from Lily Tomlin. He just takes it.
Exactly. Yeah. And the other thing that's unusual about him is that not only is he good at dealing with those kinds of incandescent creative egos or narcissists, but at the same time, he's a guy who has the mellow confidence to be able to deal with the suits. A lot of the Conan O'Brien said to me, in the Game of Thrones of show business, Lorne will be the last one standing. And
Right.
if you think about the number of administrations of NBC ownership he has outlived. Mike Schur, the SNL writer who's now created a lot of different shows. I quote him talking on a podcast once about, what it's like to work for GE. GE owned the network for a long time, and he quotes the network or pretends to quote a network saying something like, gee, how come our laser guided missile department is doing so much better than our fart joke division?
Right.
So you're working for people who are basically making toaster ovens,
Right.
and he knows how to kind of ride it out when those people turn into pests.
Yeah, you did a good job with because there's a couple eras with that where he just trusts the infrastructure and that there's going to be upheaval above him. And if he could just kind of hold on to the steering wheel. And the thing he says over and over again to people is you just got to stay on the air. You just got to keep it going. How do I stay on? Because it's the most famous stage for this was probably the Don Olmer era, the mid 90s when,
yes.
He's trying to get rid of the show and Lorne could have escalated it, turned into nuclear war and maybe he gets bounced, but he just kind of held the fort.
That's kind of what happened, what Conan did, with the Tonight Show, when he made this social movement out of Team
Which
Coco.
Lorne hated.
Yeah, that to me, that Lorne, that was like exactly what you don't do. What you do is you just keep your head down and ride it out. And the stay on the air thing, again, to look at the lessons that he garnered along the way in the 60s and 70s when he was working in LA on variety shows. He was on Laugh-In, but he knew that the cooler show was the Smothers Brothers. That's where Steve Martin wrote and Rob Reiner. And he kind of wished he were on the Smothers Brothers. But then the Smothers Brothers basically allowed themselves to become martyrs. They wouldn't let up on their on their Vietnam stuff. They had Pete Seeger on singing Waist Deep in the Big Muddy. And the president called Bill Paley and got them taken off the air. And Lorne, I think, always felt like, yeah, they did great material, but they didn't get to stay on the air. And if you're not on the air, you're nowhere.
Yeah, you have a couple good stories about the shelf life of the moment you have. One of them was the Smothers Brothers, right? Where it's like they were cool and then you fade, you turn into something else. It also, he could feel it probably happened in the early 80s when Letterman became the cool show, which you talked about too.
Yes,
when
that's an interesting
SNL's all of a sudden a little late and Letterman is now the new person. And
yes.
I mean, one of the great things about this book, I knew so little about that 5-year stretch when he wasn't on SNL. And just grabbing all of these different ideas and things, and really none of them worked out other than just getting Broadway Video to buy a bunch of IP from the show, which turned out to be really smart financially. But all the creative stuff, none of it really worked out.
Yeah, and you could he thought his TV life was over then. He thought, oh, that I did my TV thing. Now I'm going to have my Mike Nichols moment. He always wanted to make a film like The Graduate, and he thought that was his destiny. His grandparents owned a movie theater. He grew up besotted with the movies, and what's interesting is that he was working on an adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. He had bought the rights to Don DeLillo's oh gosh, the one that Noah Baumbach just made, White Noise. And, these are really highbrow pictures. They weren't like Animal House, which is what you might have expected him to do, go in a big boffo comedy direction. So that didn't work out. And the only thing he did during those years that brought him pleasure is he wrote Three Amigos with two of his best friends, Steve Martin and Randy Newman. And he described that to me as like the one time where he just felt like, this is what I always pictured it to be like, like George S. Kaufman staying up all night with the Marx Brothers, drinking too much coffee and fixing the third act. And I think he realized that, he doesn't want to sit alone in a room with a typewriter. He wants to be brainstorming with his friends. He likes a clubhouse. His whole life he's been looking for a tribe. And so that's what made him go back to SNL in 1985.
But it also, I mean, you laid out part of why he went back to SNL in 1985 is it didn't seem like he totally knew what to do.
Oh, yeah.
And this was like the one thing that he knew he was good at, and he had tried all these other things, and it just never totally fit.
Yeah. Oh, he was horribly in debt. He'd lost his own money on the new show. He had to mortgage his apartment. I mean, the idea of Lorne, in financial distress was something that he, it almost reminds me of Scarlett O'Hara. I'll never be poor again, because when he was 14, his father died suddenly, and his whole life changed. And there was financial uncertainty. It was his mother was depressed, and he's one of those guys with catastrophic thinking who kind of lived his whole adult life to make sure that never happened to him again. So when he was presented with the offer to come back and save SNL after 5 years away, he didn't know what to do. His pride felt a little wounded, like, oh, is that just going backwards? And
we should mention the show's probably dying if he doesn't come back.
Yes, so they were going to yank it. They were going to cancel it.
He's got that guilt trip part of it.
So it was save your baby or we're going to kill it. And so he asked for advice from two mentors. And he always had a lot of mentors in his life, in the same way that he would go on to be everybody else's mentor. Yeah. So the first one he asked was David Geffen, who was his first agent way back in the day. And Geffen said, Lorne, you should not go back and take that job in New York. You've done that. Someone who wants to be you should do that. And I love Lorne's response to that because it's very honest. He said to me, well, I always kind of liked being me.
Yeah.
So then the second person he asked, much more sage, an older man, Mo Austin, who was the chairman of Warner Brothers Records. Right. Mo was much more clear-eyed. He said, look, you're great at that job. You love New York City. There are very few big entertainment jobs in New York City. It's a perfect fit. You should go back. And I think that the penny dropped and Lorne realized, yeah, I'm good at live television. And, Jim Downey, one of the longest serving head writers on the show, has a great way of summing up what he thinks Lorne's strengths are that make him so good at live TV. He said, Lorne's a guy not that great at term papers, really good at tests. In other words, the hard deadline is necessary for him. With movies, he could kind of noodle around with rewrites and never actually get to the end of it. But
I like that part of the book.
The show goes on because it's 11:30, no matter what.
Yeah, I liked how you laid that out, that some people, their weakness is they can't stop tinkering with something. And it could be anything, right? It could be a magazine feature you're editing. It could be a documentary. It could just somebody that never feels like it's done and they can't make final decisions. But when you're on Saturday, 11:30, one of my favorite things about your book was that process of going between dress rehearsal and you laid out everything that happened in that Jonah Hill show, from dress rehearsal right to when they go live, when Lorne turns into like a different human and he's just like, all right, here's what and it's like the one time all week where he has to make decisions.
People have told me, and this, I'm pleased by this, people have told me that when they're reading that section of the book, their heart starts pounding.
Right.
And when you're in that room, and think about it, not a big room. This is the 9th floor office. Every square inch of the carpet. I mean, people are kneeling on their knees because there isn't even room to sit down, Indian style. Yeah. Everyone's crammed in there. It really is like a scene, they're about to go into battle, and you can feel the tension. It's thrilling. And that's obviously what drives the adrenaline and the, magic in the show, that tension, because many people have critiqued it over the years and said, wait a minute, why don't we just pick the actual 7 sketches on Wednesday? And then we don't have to have this whole Hunger Games rigmarole.
Right.
But I think Lorne knows that keeping that creative tension and the competition and that is good for creativity.
Well, one thing that was, and I'd never really thought about it correctly until I read what you wrote, but I never thought of all the factors. I would always think he'll just pick the 7 funniest things. But the stuff he's weighing about, like, is this cast member in the cast too much? Did the audience respond in the dress rehearsal? Are we going to have the right amount of energy in this part of the show? So he's on some different plane that it seems like only he can see. Which makes me wonder how anybody could take that job after him, even though he's 80.
Right.
But like, how do you come in and there are all these other factors beyond just what's funny, what's not funny. Now, maybe somebody would just approach it completely differently and be fine. But I hadn't thought about it before.
Yeah, it's Steve Higgins calls it like 5-dimensional chess. He's thinking, like, do I keep the host happy? Do I make sure, like the show I was at, I think one of the reasons that, one of the sketches got canned is just because it was these huge movie theater seats. They were just too damn hard to get in and out of the doors. So like next, and
it's like $20,000 down the drain
exactly,
the moment they say
or does
no
someone
thanks.
have time to get the prosthetic head on, and there's so many things that, all week, I mean, and this probably is a decisive management choice. One of the things that's so cool is that all week long, Lorne is soliciting opinions from everybody, and not just the writers and the cast, but, the costume assistants, the pages, he wants to hear from everybody. He likes to think of it as an egalitarian enterprise, that everyone is as necessary as everybody else. And I know that sometimes in meetings, even, he has a sheet of paper and he'll jot down every time someone has spoken because he wants to make sure everybody in the room says something. And then, so he's metabolizing all those points of view all week. And then there's a moment after the dress rehearsal when he walks up this little cinder block staircase. It's like the least glamorous place in the building, up to his office. And I just thought of this now. It's almost like, do you watch Severance?
Yeah.
You know how they go in the elevator and then they go, and it's like he goes up the staircase and he becomes the other guy. Okay, so then he's in his office and suddenly he's not thinking about what everybody else says. It's just him. It's just
so the whole week is about him peaking for that hour.
Yeah, and then
like
he goes
leading
up
up,
the stairs,
making sure he's fresh.
becomes Superman, and then he's the decider, and everything that comes out of his mouth, like it's him, it's him, it's him, it's him. And so to see that transformation, like it's really interesting.
Well, one of the great things about that week you spent with the show was the show that's in dress rehearsal and then gets the sketch that gets bumped is this Beavis and Butthead sketch that they couldn't figure out. And then they end up doing it with Ryan Gosling last season.
Yeah, 5
and it's
years
one
later.
of the best shows of the decade. And it's like, holy shit, that's the same sketch. It was dead for 5 years and came back.
I know. And I remember thinking, Louis Zakarian, the amazing makeup and prosthetics guy, he worked all week on those heads.
Yeah.
And Lorne wasn't completely getting it. First he said, I feel like it's just kind of cone heads redux, and then he also didn't understand why Jonah kept being in profile, which he thought looked really awkward. And then somebody had to say, no, in Beavis and Butthead, you always see him in profile, but it just wasn't really gelling. But yes, I mean, I kudos to the writing staff that they hung on to that.
But they must have like 10 of those a year where they're like, I can't believe he didn't pick that one. Let's just like save it and circle it back.
I saw it in dress, and I'll tell you, it was a whole lot better when Gosling did it. So.
Right. Yeah, there's reasons he didn't do it.
But another thing that was fun to learn, like I didn't know that the cowbell sketch existed before Walken, and that they did it. They tried to do it when Norm Macdonald hosted. And yet you can see, like, can you imagine anyone but Walken doing that now? No.
Right. Well, going through the years, one thing I appreciated was he was really, really grateful for some cast members that popped up at the right times. And the guy that he really effusively praised was Dana Carvey, who I still feel like is the most underrated star of the 50 years.
Do too. Yeah.
He doesn't get mentioned in the Mount Rushmore, but he should. And he was basically, Lorne has these different quotes where he's like, this guy was a machine. This guy could do everything. We were able to ride him for the late 80s, basically. And it seems like he felt that way about Aykroyd. He felt that he wasn't there for Eddie Murphy, but Eddie's in there. Will Ferrell was like that. Was there anybody else that he talked about where it was just clear Lorne was like, this is a Mount Rushmore guy for me? Or lady?
I think Phil Hartman, definitely. Yeah. I mean, and all of these people you've just mentioned, like they're actors, I mean, they're really in it. They can, somebody described Aykroyd as the kind of guy who kind of zip himself into a character and disappear into it. Very different from like the way Belushi performed, which is he's always a Belushi-esque character, But
right. He's a force of nature. Well, you had that great thing
yeah,
about Aykroyd about how if they needed to do the sketch in 3 minutes instead of 3.5, he would talk faster to make them move it along.
That's right. I think that among the women, I think Jan
Kristen
Hooks,
Wiig has to be, right?
Kristen Wiig, definitely. And one of the things that's amazing about Kristen Wiig, and when I started rewatching the shows more carefully, you see that what she does that's different from a lot of comedy performers is her acting, everything she does is so small. She does so much with less, like just little movements of her eyes, or even like if you look at her Denise character with the forehead, like it's so subtle.
Right. Hader said once to me that the unbelievable thing about her was every single character she ever did was slightly different than, there was no like, oh, I'll do this and I'll just have a wig on. It was like each thing was slightly different than the other thing. Like she was just inventing new people each time, which they were like, how does she do that?
Yeah. No. I think definitely. I mean, I think Kate McKinnon is a great actor. I think Jan Hooks was just incredible. And she also tends to, I mean, of course,
she gets shoved under the rug. Yeah, I'm with you. I did my all-time cast and she was the one that was like one of the toughest cuts for me.
Yeah.
Because I just feel like for 4 or 5 years, she was amazing and could do anything. I also like the people that can sing and perform and do sketches and do characters. Like there's like some sort of total package thing that I think only a few of them have really pulled off,
Well, one of the things that I loved, getting, because I hadn't really gotten it until I spent a whole lot of time there, is that the thing is that all of them, at the end of the day, they're just theater kids. They're all people who did Guys and Dolls in high school. Even like Lorne, there's a bit in the book where Lorraine Newman described how once she was with him in the 70s and she had just had a bad breakup, and Lorne launched into that song from West Side Story, Forget That Boy. Like the idea, I mean, I have 2 daughters who were theater kids, so I'm very familiar with this type. But all of them, I remember seeing Colin Firth interviewed once about how much he loved doing, the scene in ABBA where he's in the jumpsuit and the platform shoes, because everybody who's an actor, they just want to do that, And it was also very interesting to hear Lorne talk about, and just to see with all of them how, the audience is always projecting onto SNL. They want it to be a political show or an anarchist collective or whatever, but it's really show business. It's just show business. And that's why often when you see these scenes shot backstage, you'll look down the hall and you'll see a couple of showgirls, a man dressed as Abe Lincoln, and a llama. It's like that scene. I don't know if you're as much of a Beatles nut as I am, but like in Hard Day's Night, there's that scene in the theater where John Lennon's going down the stairs and he runs into a showgirl with a headdress. And like, even the Beatles, it's just showbiz. And there's something I kind of love about that.
We're going to take a break and come back, and I want to talk about Lorne as Confucius.
Okay.
All right, Lorne as Confucius, which seems to be a recurring theme with everybody who's been in his orbit. He just dropped shit like, I took down some couple things from your book that I screenshotted. He was talking about Belushi taking Chevy Chase's overnight fame the hardest. And he said, there's a certain kind of person who, if they're not famous by 26, they're going to burst into flames, which I thought was like, yeah, he's probably seen that too. These people that come on the show and they're like so anxious to have it all happen. But it seems like he seems to feel like, except for the rare exceptions like Carvey, you almost need 2 years on the show before you can become who you are. Like what did you find out when you're researching the book? Like what's the arc of a cast member to actually be really good on the show?
Well, I think that I think he really likes and respects the ones who come in there and survey the scene and figure out, okay, this is how I can be effective here. Like plenty of them, and again, they're young, there's no orientation, there's no instruction packet. Like it's sink or swim. You have to figure out, okay, who can write for me? Who can I write with? How am I going to get on the air? And the ones who can sort that out, are the ones who are really going to make it.
Well, then there's someone like Kristen Wiig comes in and she's just immediately, you could tell,
just
like,
knows how to do it.
She's going to be on the show for 7 years.
There are a few shortcuts, this began with Billy Murray when he started on the show in the second season. He had a good first show, and then he just kind of disappeared. People didn't like him. Audience didn't like him because they thought he was a Chevy replacement, and he wasn't so cute as Chevy. But he was playing like second cop parts. So Lorne and he devised this idea that Billy would come on the show behind a desk and just address the audience and just say, "Hey, I'm not cutting it here. I don't know what's the matter, people. Don't you like me?" And he talked about his dead father and everything. But that did it. He connected with the audience. They really liked him, and he was in. And that kind of began this tradition of one of the time-honored ways that new cast members kind of get their footing is to go on Weekend Update kind of as themselves and say their name into the camera. I mean, think of Adam Sandler when he did his first Thanksgiving song. He was not really thriving so much on the show, but then he came in, he was himself, he looked like himself, he did his funny little song. Everybody knew, oh, I know that guy now. And the week
Eddie
I
Murphy
was there,
did that too with Raheem Abdul-Muhammad. That was the first time he did that. That was it. He took off.
So that works, And the week I was there, Melissa Villaseñor had one on Update, and that she broke through. So, there are a lot of different kind of shortcuts. Some people are just so good at it. Look at Kenan Thompson, who's been there forever. He just, I think he recognizes it as a good thing. Lorne will often say that, people's agents and managers are the menace because they'll suddenly start getting like movie offers and they'll say, "Hey, you gotta get out of this place. You gotta leave. It's time to leave." And Lorne, does a lot of sidebar conversations with these people. And what he says, another one of his co-ends is, let them build a bridge that's strong enough so they can walk across it and walk away. But
yeah, that was another Lorne Confucius thing.
Yeah, and there are so many of them, and some of them, what I love is some of them actually can't figure out what the hell they mean, and writers and casts spend years talking about them. And one that a lot of people mention to me is something he would say, "Well, there's people who build the house and there's people who buy the house, and you have to figure out which one you are." And everyone is like, "What the hell
what does that mean? What if I'm both?"
I don't know.
You had this is another one when he was talking about Chevy Chase when he said the idea that you could feel things for somebody and then you run out of it. I realized so people burn out of relationships, and he said that about a family member, but he was talking about Chevy Chase. Like sometimes the professional relationship, it just is what it is. It's supposed to be 4, 5, 6 years, and then it's over, and it's like real life.
And you have to walk away. Yeah. And I think it was, when he started the show and had the original Not Ready for Primetime players, they were just kind of supposed to be in the background. Nobody was supposed to become a star. No one was supposed to become famous. So when suddenly Chevy was famous and he was on the cover of New York Magazine, that totally messed up the ecosystem. It was a loss of innocence, to use one of Lorne's favorite terms. And everyone got jealous.
Fame back then too. It's 30 million people watching the show potentially on a Saturday night. It's just different level.
And so it was very painful for him to see this tribe, this family fractured. But when Chevy did go, as painful as it was, again, this was one of these lessons that he had to internalize. He realized, okay, this is going to happen again and again and again. And so he sort of inured himself to it. But he also realized that, like George Steinbrenner or like any sports team, you have to keep bringing in rookies. You have to seed the team. And that's something he learned the hard way, but that's how he's kept it going for 50 years. That there are always new people.
I think that's one of the reasons I connect with the whole structure of the show, because it's a lot like sports.
Yes.
You have to constantly think about like, all right, this person's taken off. I probably only have them for 2 more years. Now I got to develop a bench behind them. Another thing that I loved, I should have mentioned this 3 minutes ago, but his hatred of agents and managers and how just their agenda doesn't align. All they're doing is just trying to get whoever the most amount of money possible. Yeah, they don't care about career. They don't care about relationships, and how he tries to navigate that. But it's like one of the few things he can't hide his contempt for, which is like these
Oh
people.
yeah, I mean, he says, I think I somewhere in at least one place he says in the book, agents are morons,
Right.
And the thing they all hate more than anything is when agents get tickets to the show and they're in the audience. I mean, people have told me, but because they're so jaded. I mean, you want the real fans. You don't want an agent. So you'll look up at the balcony and you'll see a bunch of, CAA agents and their dates asleep.
They're half asleep. Yeah. More stuff.
But about the Steinbrenner thing.
Yeah.
And this, I found myself wondering if this had something to do with your affinity for the show. Lorne, he is a sports guy. I mean, loves the Yankees, goes to the Knicks, he's a big hockey guy. And he uses a lot of sports metaphors all the time. He uses a lot of baseball metaphors. When Will Ferrell was talking to me about Lorne's style, he said, Lorne's he's like a baseball manager. He knows you got to keep the highs not too high and the lows not too low because it's a long season. And a lot of people, use sports talk to talk about how the show works. And the other thing people say is that the closest thing to SNL on television, because it's live, is sports.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's like a live sporting event. Yeah. Well, you had stuff in there about how a compliment from him it's rare. So when you get one, it means something. But it is the cast members that succeed the best. I've talked about this. It's like a basketball team where when you play basketball, it's not just about, clear out, I'm going to score. Like you're trying to make other people better. You're trying to connect with people. You're trying to move without the ball and set picks. And those are the people that always do best on the show. Here's another Lorne quote. The trouble with a thankless job is that no one thanks you. Like you could put this shit in like fortune cookies.
I know. Wow, that's a great marketing idea for the paperback.
And he talked about why he's devoted to the show. When it takes every ounce of my strength to get it on and there's nothing but resistance and nobody seems to give a fuck, then I want out because you can only give up your life for something greater than you. So far, it's been worth it. Now he's 80 and he's still giving up his life for the show. Yeah. But there's other reasons for that, right? Like the moment he's not running SNL, you're not getting your calls returned in quite the same way. Like there's a power that comes with the show that I think he's aware of.
I think it's so much his whole life and his whole personality. I don't think he's going to leave there unless it's on a stretcher, and he always says that if producing's done well, you leave no fingerprints.
Yeah.
And that's true. And that's sort of why he's been behind the curtain all these years. But at the same time, his fingerprints are on everything. Every one of them has absorbed his sort of gospel and his sense of values about the show, and not just about the show, but about how to live their lives. In addition to all of his comedy rules and axioms, he teaches them how to live in New York, how to order in a restaurant,
he's paying for like new teeth for cast members and all kinds of things.
And the gifts he gives are so you get people have told me, he gave me this really great luggage or Simon Pierce glassware. And you sort of feel like he's ushering them into the good life. I was with Jim Downey once when he opened this box. It was an Hermes, big orange box. It was an Hermes sweater for his birthday. And he was so intimidated by it. He Googled it and saw how expensive it was. And he said, I have to get a safety deposit box for this thing.
Right.
Afraid to wear it.
He had a story about that you have in the book that I'd never heard about when Ray Charles was on the show. And he was going to be reunited with all these people that he had done all this great stuff with. And he's like, are you excited to see them? And Ray Charles said, most of them owe me money, and wasn't excited at all. And he's like, all right, I'm going to tuck that story away too.
Exactly.
That down the road, these special relationships I allegedly have might not be so special 20 years from now.
Yeah. I mean, again, that's the sort of keep the highs not too high, the lows not too low. I mean, there's a way in which all these people, they are his family members. He's recreated the family that, he lost when his father suddenly died when he was a child. But there's also, it's also business. I mean, he walks this very fine line.
Right. Well, and also when he stopped doing SNL after the first 5 years, you have a thing about, the phone's not quite ringing the same way.
Yeah.
There's some Conan O'Brien stuff in this book that I've believed and felt for a while that you really got into. And, not like in a New York Post page 6 kind of way, but it was, that he was the one person. He did the Tonight Show and he moved to LA and he kind of left Lorne out of it, which has been atypical for everybody who's passed through the universe. And it seemed a little chilly. Could you feel that when you were reporting it?
I did feel that, and I thought there was so much regret surrounding it, and I mean, I wanted to jump
On
in
both
and say,
sides?
I think so. I think there was real pain. I mean, Conan is always the first to say that if Lorne Michaels hadn't looked at him at one point and said, he would never have had this. And think about it. Conan wasn't even a performer. He was a writer.
Right.
To get a writer like this and give him this huge platform. And the thing that's so sort of sweet about it is, I think there's a sort of a bit of a road not taken aspect of that for Lorne, because he started out as a comedy writer who maybe wanted to perform, but and Lorne exalts writers. So
but became a really fun performer on the show in his own weird way, which you covered nicely.
Yeah.
Like he became a character somehow.
Right. I mean, I think the Lorne character is as big a character as Church Lady.
Yeah.
But so yeah, he gave the keys to the kingdom to Conan, and I think Conan, I think it's most people in the business feel that Conan and his camp made a tactical error when they did not insist that Lorne be made executive producer of The Tonight Show.
Well, but
LA.
they also broke the rule where he found out from somebody else, not them, which seems like the one way to really cross Lorne.
And I know those guys. I know, went to college with Conan, and I know Jeff Ross's manager. And I do think they have some regret about it. They were very young. They were very caught up in it. These big shots at NBC were saying to them, no, you don't need Lorne Michaels. You don't,
Yeah, you're going to do it in LA. You don't need Lorne. He's in New York.
Activist NBC management at that time who didn't really, they kind of wanted to elbow Lorne off the stage. So, but as Jeff told me, and I quote him in the book saying, you know what? We didn't jump in front of the truck for Lorne. So why should Lorne have jumped in front of the truck for us? And Lorne would never have admitted, having his feelings hurt or that they should have done it differently. But everyone in his camp feels like it was a faux pas.
Well, and I said this at the time when all that was happening, because we were doing podcasts about it.
Yeah.
And I just don't think what happens to Conan happens if Lorne's involved. He was too powerful and he meant too much to NBC. And if like the whole Leno, that it just wouldn't have happened. I think Conan's protected.
A disaster. But the kind of beautiful thing at this point is, Conan is now king of podcasts. He's just doing so great. I'm so happy that Conan has landed where he has. And he and Lorne are on very, very good terms. It was great to see Conan at the anniversary show. And I think there's a lot of real, honest, ongoing affection between the two of them.
A couple other things that I loved. When he brought Rob Lowe in for Wayne's World, he likes to hire people who've just had a flop because they work twice as hard. Like, who else would think like that?
Absolutely right. It's true. Who would have thought of that? Yeah. No, because that was right after the sex tape. Rob Lowe was in disgrace.
Conan said about Lorne, a lot of people, this is to you, a lot of people, myself included, think that Lorne has a secret, and Lorne has made a career out of letting people think he has a secret. I think Lorne's real secret was to communicate to me, you have to figure out this show. He's basically saying, I actually don't think Lorne has the secret, but he'll have like a really good thought starter that you can then take and run with it. That's how I interpreted that, right?
I think so too, but I think also it's that Lorne has, unconsciously or not, cultivated this mystery and power that makes everybody want his good opinion, want to do good work for him. It's and that is the secret. It's this power that he holds over these people.
It's that they just trust his take on, if he's really passionate about one thing, they'll trust him.
Yeah. I mean, John Hamm told me that there isn't a day that goes by where he doesn't think, what would Lorne do? And he curbs the impulse to pick up the phone and call Lorne and ask him, over when it's really important. But a lot of these people live their lives that way.
You had a lot in the book about the imitation game with Lorne, which has started God only knows since the 70s, and how aware Lorne is of it, and how many different iterations there were, and all these different, the writers would have their thing, and then Bill Hader would have his thing, and it would just go on, and Carvey and all that stuff. And Lorne, it just seems like he's fine with it, right? Because you make fun of the boss. That's what happens.
Well, one of the funny things Lorne said about it to me, he said, it's the most American thing there is, making fun of the boss. And then he said, of course, they don't really do it much in Canada because nobody's that successful there.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that is consistent with another one of his many theorems, which is the infinite monkey theorem, which is how he views the essence of comedy writing. It's that old joke about, you put 1,000 monkeys in a room with a bunch of typewriters, and eventually one of them will write Hamlet. There was a 60s comic named Stanley Myron Handelman who changed that joke to say, put the monkeys in the room with the typewriters. I went back a couple hours later, and they were just fooling around. And Lorne thinks that there's this incredible wisdom in that, and that's what you do with comedy writers. That's why you have them writing all night long when their defenses are down, when
Right.
maybe they're drunk.
The guard is down.
70s, fatigue is your friend, he'll say. And because you want them to be at their goofiest. You don't want to be too, self-conscious when you're writing comedy. You want to really, it's like pure id, I guess. And I think he recognizes that all that time they spend making fun of him, it's like lubrication for comedy, it loosens them up. And Paul Appel even said it kind of helps you deal with the fear, the fear of Lorne and the fear that you're not going to get on the air. It makes you just sort of loosen up. And again, he's a smart enough manager of people to know that if that works for them, fine, And he also told me, and I wish I'd kind of pushed harder on this, he said that he does this too, that he's a really good mimic of the people at the show, and he just does it at home. But
interesting.
Never
like
got
just
to
to family members?
I guess. That's volume 2.
When do you think he realized that he was just going to be on the show and this was it? Like what year? It was somewhere between probably late 80s, early 90s where he just, all right, this is my life. This is what I'm doing.
Well, I think a real turning point came after 9/11, because the whole 90s, the mid 90s were a terrible time for him with almost getting fired by Don Ohlmeyer. And then the show picked up steam with all the great, political debate stuff that Jim Downey wrote and everything. And then 9/11, it was the moment that I think the show emerged as a kind of an important American institution.
And a New York institution too, like simultaneously,
I
right?
mean, it brought it back to its roots. This was it was the first time in my life that America seemed to like New York, right?
Yeah.
And New York suddenly was kind
even
of buffed
me.
up again.
I hate New York, and even that I remember rooting for the Yankees in the playoffs, hoping they'd get one for the city.
So the way he conceived of that moment with the firefighters and Mayor Giuliani pre-disgrace, and had Paul Simon sing that song. Like he just had this producer's knack for navigating that moment, doing something that was so beautiful and profound and also funny, I mean, as he says in the latter part of my book when he's talking about doing the COVID show. And, you just always have to, the show has to show up and you have to remind viewers that there's a decency to the show. And I think that it was that moment that the show and Lorne himself just kind of were, it was kind of a Hall of Fame moment. They weren't going anywhere. He's never really been under threat since then.
It's interesting because when they missed the moment, which I think, and you wrote in the book, that after Trump got elected, when the way they started the show, it just didn't work. I didn't think it worked in the moment. I think people behind the scenes didn't feel like it worked. And now I don't think anybody looks back and thinks, what a great moment.
Some people told me, I love Kate McKinnon singing that song. But I mean, I thought it was kind of wet. I just thought it was.
Just didn't work.
Some people liked it. But again, I thought the reason I thought that was interesting is because it showed how finely calibrated his ability to kind of deal with the sort of millennial sensibilities on his staff are. He knew he had to give them something. They wanted to do this. He didn't like it, but he let them have it. And it reminded me, a funny anecdote that I love in the book is I'm walking with him through the theater district. We passed the Mean Girls marquee. That's the show he produced with Tina Fey. And he was disappointed because his friend Margaret Trudeau was in town and he got her tickets for that night. And he was angry because the lead actress had called in sick that day because her dog had eaten glue and she had to take the dog to the vet. So she wasn't going to be in the show. And Lorne just shook his head and he said, if it was Patti LuPone's dog, it would be dead. It's just the idea that, because he's a real showbiz guy. The show must go on. And the fact that his friend Margaret Trudeau was going to have to see an understudy, didn't like that.
Couple other things. You were talking about Ann Beats when she came back for the anniversary show. And he's kind of saying like, oh, her career didn't kind of go the way maybe she thought it was going to go. And he said, you were like so many others who started the show. Beats, Michael said, didn't understand heat. They didn't understand that you're hot for about 2 or 3 years. And if nothing else happens, you go to the back of the line again, which it seems like he was painfully aware of with himself too, right?
That's just what, I mean, he learned that after the first 5 years. And so again, he's just like this guy. He's got this lesson book that he remembers.
Right.
Like, think about the rest of us and so many people we know, we repeat our mistakes.
Right.
We do the same thing over and over. He doesn't. He somehow learns from his mistakes.
What's the most fair criticism you heard from him, from the people you were interviewing, that was like a recurring criticism
of him?
About him? Yeah.
Gee, let me think. I think that there are people who just feel that sometimes his aloofness can actually be cruel and cold. There are definitely people who feel that way. There's the same number of people who say like, oh, when my wife got sick, he called and fixed the insurance. And, so it's both.
Right. He paid for funerals. He paid for Mike McDonough's funeral, even though O'Donoghue, but I didn't like him.
But I do think that sort of icy management thing, which there's the book deals in it. I think mostly that kind of peaked in the 90s. You have Bob Odenkirk moaning about why the hell is this guy in charge and everything. But at the same time, Odenkirk and Lorne are now good friends. I mean, what there's a lot of in Lorne's life, it's, the way people, in 12-step programs and like make amends. Lorne gets a lot of letters from people 30 years later saying, I can't believe I was such a jerk when I worked for you. Now I know how hard your job is because I've had to, be a director or manage people.
Well, you're dealing with ambitious people in their 20s and 30s. I mean, I'm sure I look back at some of the stuff I did like way back when. I'm like, God damn it, why did I do that? I'm sure they have a lot of those moments, especially a pressure cooker where it's Hunger Games every week. Everyone's pitted against each other. He said, you have this near the end. You can't spend the last half of your life watching the first half of your life, which is how he felt about nostalgia. Is that one of the reasons he's still working at age 80?
I think that's true. He doesn't, I think these anniversary shows mean a lot to him, but he isn't on a nostalgia trip. He is really in the moment. He's never like, oh, those were the days. It was better then. He's, I think he probably thinks that the utility of all the fanfare over the 50th is to get more viewers for the 51st and 52nd season. He's always charging ahead. He's thinking about the next cast. Earlier this season, I was talking to him about how this current cast is really big. It's a big cast again.
It's too big.
And he said something like, it always takes like 2 or 3 years for the kind of new cast to sort of settle. And it just struck me that as he's about to settle the 50th, he's thinking ahead. He's thinking about making the cast work. And I think that's part of the secret of it. He doesn't look back. And again, why it was all the more special that when I talked to him right after the 40th, he was in this sort of rare sweet spot of thinking about the past and the future and his legacy. And I think there's a lot of warmth in him that he's letting come to the surface a little bit more now. And that is kind of lovely.
Well, the biggest thing that's helped him is that hasn't been a kick-ass threat competitor to come in. And I always thought Netflix, I just can't believe Netflix hasn't challenged him yet, but I think it's because Sarandos loves the show so much. He just doesn't want to challenge Lorne.
Yeah, Sarandos is one of those guys who sends him a Father's Day greeting,
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting to see, right? Sarandos is behind this new, Netflix's first foray into late night television with the John Mulaney show coming.
Oh, and comedy too. They're like at the, they have this whole Netflix is a joke week out here. And the one thing that's missing is like an SNL type show, but I just don't think they're doing it until Lorne leaves.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think at this point there's so many issues of respect and karma that nobody's going to try to, nudge him off the stage that way.
Well, congrats on the book. I had you for an hour. I could have gone longer, but
it was really fun.
I thought it was so enjoyable because I'm so fascinated by him. But the management and perspective on success and loyalty and all that stuff, I just thought it was really cool. I love the way he laid it out, and the behind the scenes stuff with that Jonah Hill show was just awesome. Like as a diehard SNL person, like I thought it was so interesting.
Well, and once I got to really know all those personalities, just to see, I just did Lawrence O'Donnell's show, and he said it was sort of like The Office, like a workplace comedy. I mean, just seeing like the way he would manipulate Colin Jost this way, and the way he would get Jonah Hill to not to shut up, and the way it's just like it's really interesting to watch.
Well, congrats. Go get the book.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you. All right, that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Kyle Mann and Susan Morrison. Thanks to Kyle and Gahau and Cerruti. As always, don't forget, you can watch this as a video on Spotify. You can watch it on YouTube, on the Bill Simmons YouTube channel. You can watch all of our rewatchable stuff on the Ringer Movies channel. And we have Celtics City. Get ready. Monday night, March 3rd, HBO and Max, episode 1, a 9-week journey about the Celtics and basketball and America and Boston and life. So that's happening. Enjoy the weekend. I'll see you with Russillo on Sunday afternoon. We're going to tape, I think, right after the Denver Celtics game, which should be a barn burner. So enjoy the weekend. See you then.